They invited the invisible woman to the party as a joke. But when she walked through those doors, she didn't just arrive. She shattered every assumption they'd built their empire on. This is the story of Nina Rowe, the assistant who was never supposed to matter, and the night one invitation burned an entire world to the ground. If you're ready to see what happens when dignity becomes the most dangerous weapon in the room, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Nina's story travels. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Wexler and Moss Capital smelled like leather, ambition, and the particular kind of arrogance that only came with too much money and too little accountability. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sprawling view of the city below, where ordinary people moved like ants through their ordinary lives. Lives that meant nothing to the men and women who made decisions in rooms like this. Graham Wexler sat at the head of the table, his tailored navy suit fitting him like a second skin, his silver cufflinks catching the afternoon light. At 36, he'd built a reputation as the wunderkind CEO who'd tripled the firm's value in 5 years. Sharp-featured and effortlessly commanding, he had the kind of presence that made people straighten their spines when he entered a room. To his right sat Miranda Vale, his fiancée of 8 months. She was all polished edges and calculated charm. Auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a smile that could cut glass. Miranda had made herself indispensable to Graham not through genuine partnership, but through carefully curated social connections and an instinct for knowing exactly whose opinion mattered. Across from her, Cole Raddick sprawled in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Graham's college roommate turned business partner, Cole had coasted through life on charisma and family money, treating the firm like his personal playground. His expensive watch caught the light as he gestured broadly, mid-story. "I'm telling you," Cole said, laughter already bubbling in his voice. "She actually organized the files by color last month. Not by client name, not by date, by the color of the folder. Said it was more visually intuitive." Miranda's laugh was like wind chimes made of ice. "You're joking. I couldn't make this up if I tried." Cole leaned forward, warming to his audience. Graham had to spend 20 minutes explaining why alphabetical order exists. Graham felt the corner of his mouth twitch. He shouldn't encourage this. He knew he shouldn't. But the story was absurd, and Miranda's entertainment was infectious, and it felt good to be in on the joke rather than the target of it. "To be fair," Graham said, and he could hear the amusement creeping into his own voice, "she did find the Hamilton file faster than usual." "Because it was orange," Cole crowed. "She remembered it was orange." Miranda pressed her fingers to her temple in mock despair. "And this is the person answering your phones? Darling, what does that say about the firm?" The door opened before Graham could respond. Nina Rowe entered with the quiet efficiency that had become her signature. She was 28, but dressed like someone trying to disappear. Charcoal cardigan over a plain white blouse, black slacks that had seen better days, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No jewelry except for a slim watch with a cracked face. She moved like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. "Mr. Wexler," she said softly, setting a folder on the table beside him. "The Morrison contracts you requested." Her voice was steady but small, carefully neutral. She didn't look at Miranda or Cole. She rarely looked at anyone directly. "Thank you, Nina." Graham took the folder without looking up. She turned to leave. "Nina, wait!" Miranda's voice stopped her mid-step. "I'm curious about something." Nina turned back, her expression carefully blank. "Yes, Ms. Vale?" "The gala on Saturday. The annual charity event at the Grand Meridian." Miranda's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "You've worked here 3 years now. Have you ever attended?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Nina's pause was barely perceptible. "No, ma'am. It's typically for executives and partners." "And their guests," Cole added helpfully, grinning. "Don't forget the guests." "Right." Miranda examined her manicured nails. "It just seems odd, doesn't it? You handle so much of the firm's correspondence, coordinate so many schedules, but you've never actually experienced what we do. The networking, the atmosphere, the caliber of people who attend these things." Graham felt a prickle of unease. He knew that tone. Miranda was building to something. "I manage fine from the administrative side. Nina said quietly. I'm sure you do. Miranda's smile widened. But wouldn't it be valuable for you to see how these events actually work? For professional development? Cole caught on immediately, his grin spreading. You know, that's actually not a bad point. How can Nina properly support the firm if she doesn't understand the social dynamics at play? Exactly. Miranda turned to Graham with wide, innocent eyes. Darling, don't you think Nina should attend this year? As part of her professional growth? The trap closed beautifully. If Graham said no, he looked like he was deliberately excluding staff from opportunities. If he said yes, Nina would be thrown into a high society event where she'd be completely out of her depth, and Miranda and Cole would have fresh material for weeks. Graham met Nina's gaze for the first time. Her dark eyes were calm, unreadable. She wasn't pleading or embarrassed. She was simply waiting. He made his choice. You know what? That's a great idea. Graham leaned back in his chair, committing to the performance. Nina, consider yourself cordially invited to Saturday's gala. It'll be good for you to see how we operate in these environments. Cole's laugh was barely suppressed. Miranda's expression was pure triumph. That's very generous, Mr. Wexler, Nina said, her tone unchanged. But I wouldn't want to intrude on an event meant for the firm's leadership. Nonsense, Miranda purred. We insist, don't we, Graham? Absolutely. Graham heard himself doubling down, swept up in the momentum. I think it would be valuable for everyone. Nina's gaze shifted between them, landing finally on Graham. Something flickered in her eyes, assessment, maybe, or recognition. May I ask a question, Mr. Wexler? The room went quiet. Nina almost never asked questions. Of course, Graham said. Does this invitation carry an intention? The question was so simple, so direct, that Graham felt wrong-footed. I'm sorry? An intention, Nina repeated, her voice still soft but somehow clearer. Are you inviting me because you believe my attendance would genuinely benefit the firm? Or is there another purpose I should be aware of? Miranda's smile froze. Cole's smirk faltered. Graham felt the weight of the moment shift. The honest answer would expose the cruelty of the joke, but admitting that felt impossible with Miranda and Cole watching. Just for fun, Nina, he said, and hated how false it sounded even to his own ears. No hidden agenda. Just an opportunity for you to be part of something. Nina studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched. I'll consider it, she said finally. Thank you for the invitation. She left before anyone could respond, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality that felt heavier than it should. Miranda recovered first, her laugh bright and vicious. Oh, this is going to be delicious. Can you imagine her trying to make conversation with the Ashford Chens or standing next to Gabrielle Laurent? She'll probably wear something from a department store clearance rack, Cole added, already pulling out his phone. I need to make sure Tyler knows to get photos. But Graham wasn't laughing anymore. That question, does this invitation carry an intention, had landed differently than Nina's usual compliance. There had been something sharp underneath her quiet tone, something aware. Did she just call you out? Miranda asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. Don't be ridiculous, Graham said quickly. She asked a clarifying question. That's literally her job. Miranda's expression suggested she wasn't convinced, but she let it go. Well, regardless, Saturday should be entertaining. I'm going to make sure everyone knows she'll be there. She rose gracefully, kissing Graham's cheek. I have a fitting at 3. Dinner tonight? 7 at Marcello's, Graham confirmed. After Miranda left, Cole lingered, scrolling through his phone. You know Sarah from compliance is going to lose her mind when she hears about this. She's been trying to get Nina to come to happy hour for 2 years. Why? Graham asked, genuinely curious. He'd never thought much about Nina's relationships within the firm. Cole shrugged. Apparently she's weirdly good at listening. People tell her things. He grinned. Though what they talk about, I have no idea. Can't imagine she has much to contribute. Graham frowned. She's been here 3 years, and you've never had a real conversation with her? Have you? The question hit harder than it should have. Graham reviewed his interactions with Nina, thousands of them, probably, over 3 years. Requests for files, scheduling confirmations, the occasional thanks, but an actual conversation about anything beyond work? He came up empty. Exactly, Cole said, interpreting Graham's silence correctly. She's a functionary. She prints, she files, she answers phones. That's the entire scope of Nina Rowe. He stood, pocketing his phone, which is why Saturday is going to be hilarious. She'll be like a middle schooler at prom. After Cole left, Graham tried to return to work. The Morrison contracts needed review. The quarterly projections demanded attention, and he had a call with Tokyo in an hour. But Nina's question kept circling back. Does this invitation carry an intention? She'd known. Somehow, she'd known exactly what they were doing, and she'd given him a chance to tell the truth, and he'd lied to her face. Graham pulled up Nina's personnel file, something he'd never done before. The basics were unremarkable. Hired 3 years ago through a temp agency, promoted from reception to executive assistant within 6 months, consistent performance reviews noting efficiency and reliability, no disciplinary issues, no complaints. Under emergency contacts, she'd listed only one name, Evan Rowe, brother. No parents, no partner, just a brother. Graham closed the file, unsettled by how little he actually knew about the woman who managed half his professional life. He didn't know where she lived, what she did outside work, whether she had friends or hobbies or dreams beyond filing systems. She was a ghost who organized his calendar, and he just invited that ghost to an event designed to humiliate her. His phone buzzed. Miranda had sent a group text to her inner circle, 6 of the firm's most socially connected associates, with a photo of Nina from the company directory and 3 words, Saturday's surprise guest. The responses came rapid fire. You're kidding. OMG, stop. This is going to be amazing. Someone needs to live stream this. Graham stared at the screen, watching the cruelty multiply in real time. He could stop it. One text from him would kill the joke completely. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Miranda sent another message. Darling, you're a genius. This is exactly the kind of entertainment these boring galas need. Graham locked his phone without responding. Across the city, in a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like coffee and old books, Nina Rowe sat at a scarred kitchen table and stared at nothing. Her younger brother Evan emerged from the apartment's only bedroom, toweling his hair dry from a shower. At 19, he had their father's height and their mother's easy smile, though both those people were long gone now, claimed by a car accident when Evan was 12 and Nina was 21. You okay? Evan asked, draping the towel around his neck. You've been staring at that wall for 10 minutes. Nina blinked, pulling herself back to the present. My boss invited me to a gala. Evan's eyebrows rose. The guy who makes you work through lunch, that boss? That's the one. And you're going? I haven't decided yet. Evan pulled out the chair across from her, sitting down with the casual sprawl of someone who'd never learned to be uncomfortable in his own skin. Walk me through it. What's the angle? This was their ritual, born from 7 years of being each other's only family. When life threw curveballs, they talked it through like strategists planning a campaign. His fiancée suggested it, Nina said, in front of his business partner. They were already making fun of me before I walked in. I heard them through the door. Classy people. They want me to show up and be a spectacle. The poor assistant who doesn't know which fork to use, wearing the wrong dress, saying the wrong things. Nina's voice remained level, but her fingers tightened around her coffee mug. They want to laugh at me. So don't go, Evan said simply. Let them have their stupid party without you. That's what they expect me to do. Decline politely, confirm their assumption that I know my place. Evan studied her carefully. But you don't want to do what they expect. Nina met his gaze. For 3 years I've been invisible. I've made myself small and quiet and forgettable because that's what survival looked like. But Evan, I'm so tired of being erased. Then stop being invisible, Evan said. Show up and show them exactly who you are. They'll still mock me. Maybe, Evan shrugged, or maybe you'll surprise them. You've done it before. He wasn't wrong. Before their parents died, before medical bills and funeral costs and Evan's college fund evaporated, before Nina took the first job she could find to keep them fed and housed. Before all of that, she'd been someone else entirely. Someone who'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in international relations. Someone who'd spent 2 years overseas building literacy programs in communities that had never seen libraries. Someone who'd spoken at conferences and networked with diplomats and believed she could change the world through education and persistence. That person felt like a stranger now. But maybe she wasn't completely gone. Nina stood, moving to the bedroom's small closet. Behind winter coats and spare linens, she found the box she'd sealed 7 years ago. The tape came off easily, like it had been waiting. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a dress. Midnight blue silk that moved like water, with a neckline that suggested elegance without seeking approval. It had been a gift from the director of the Literacy Foundation, purchased in Singapore for a fundraising gala where Nina had delivered the keynote speech. She'd been 26 and fearless, speaking to a room full of people who donated millions because they believed in the work she was doing. She'd never worn it again after her parents died. There had been no galas in her new life, no conferences, no rooms full of people who saw her as anything more than the person who answered phones. "Whoa," Evan said from the doorway. "That's the dress?" Nina held it up, checking for moth holes or discoloration, but it was perfect, preserved like a relic from another lifetime. "You're really doing this," Evan said, and it wasn't a question. "I think I am." "Good," he grinned, "because those people sound like they need someone to mess up their evening." Nina almost smiled. "That's not why I'm going." "No?" "I'm going because I want to remember what it feels like to not be invisible." She folded the dress carefully, setting it aside, even if it's just for one night. By Friday afternoon, the entire firm knew about Nina's invitation. Sarah Chen from compliance caught her by the coffee station, eyes wide with disbelief. "Is it true? You're going to the gala?" Nina nodded, stirring sugar into her coffee with careful precision. "Nina, that's incredible." Sarah's enthusiasm seemed genuine. "Are you excited? Nervous? Do you have a dress?" "Oh, we should do your makeup. I know this amazing—" "I'm fine, Sarah," Nina interrupted gently. "But thank you." Sarah's face fell slightly. "Right, of course. I just thought, if you wanted company or help." "I appreciate it," Nina said. "Really." But Sarah walked away looking disappointed, and Nina felt the familiar weight of isolation settle back onto her shoulders. Sarah meant well, but accepting help meant explaining things Nina had spent 3 years not explaining. It meant revealing the gap between who she'd been and who she'd become. It was easier to stay quiet. At lunch, Nina overheard 2 junior associates talking in the break room. "Miranda's taking bets on how long she lasts before she runs out crying," one said. "That's cruel even for Miranda," the other replied, but she was laughing. Nina left without getting her lunch. By 3 o'clock, Tyler Morrison from marketing had apparently started a pool on what Nina would wear. The odds-on favorite was something beige and shapeless. Second place went to her work clothes because she doesn't own anything else. Nina saw the spreadsheet when someone left it open on the copier. She made a copy for herself. Not because it hurt, though it did in a distant way, but because she wanted to remember. She wanted evidence of this moment, this assumption, this casual cruelty. She wanted to remember what it felt like to be a punchline. Graham saw her only once that day, emerging from a meeting with the legal team. She was at her desk, typing something with intense focus, her expression completely neutral. "Nina," he said, and she looked up immediately. "Do you need anything for tomorrow? Transportation? Or, 'I'm fine, Mr. Wexler, thank you.'" Her tone was perfectly professional. Nothing in her voice suggested she knew about the bets or the group chats or the rumors Miranda had been spreading all week. But Graham knew she must know. Nothing happened in this firm without Nina knowing about it eventually. She processed every email, heard every phone call, saw every calendar. She was the central nervous system of Wexler and Moss, invisible but essential, and they'd all forgotten that invisible didn't mean unaware. "Nina," he started again, then stopped. What could he say? "I'm sorry we're all terrible people. This was supposed to be funny, but now it just feels cruel. I could stop this if I wanted to, but I won't because that would make me look weak." "Was there something else, Mr. Wexler?" "No," Graham said. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Yes, sir." He walked away feeling like he'd failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. That evening, Miranda insisted on discussing strategy for the gala over dinner at Marcello's, the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. "I've seated her at table 12, Miranda said, sipping her wine. "That's where we put the board members' elderly relatives, people who won't expect much conversation." "Isn't that a little obvious?" Graham asked. Miranda's look was sharp. "Would you prefer I seat her with the venture capital partners? The ones who'll quiz her about market trends and investment strategies?" She softened slightly, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Darling, I'm trying to minimize her embarrassment. Table 12 is a kindness. Put that way, it sounded almost charitable. Tyler's arranging for the photographer to be nearby when she arrives, Miranda continued. Just for documentation. Some of the associates want proof this actually happened. That seems unnecessary. It's just fun, Graham. Office culture, team bonding. Miranda studied him over her wine glass. You're not getting cold feet about this, are you? No, Graham said quickly. Of course not. Good. Because Cole's been telling everyone how this was your idea, and if you back out now, you'll look indecisive. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. We're committed. Might as well enjoy it. Graham nodded, draining his scotch more quickly than he intended. At home that night, he stood on his penthouse balcony and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere down there, Nina was preparing for tomorrow. Choosing what to wear, maybe. Practicing what to say. Steeling herself for an evening where she'd be the entertainment. Graham's phone buzzed. Cole had sent a meme to the partners' group chat, a movie still from a social disaster scene with Nina's face poorly photoshopped onto it. The caption read, "Tomorrow's vibe." 4 partners had already reacted with laughing emojis. Graham locked his phone without responding and went inside, trying to ignore the growing certainty that tomorrow was going to be a mistake he couldn't undo. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of golden light that seemed designed for important events. Nina woke early, made coffee, and laid out the blue dress on her bed like a battle plan. Evan emerged from the couch where he'd fallen asleep watching late-night comedy. Big day. Big day, Nina agreed. You nervous? She considered the question honestly. No, nervous would mean I'm uncertain about the outcome. But I already know what's going to happen. They're going to stare, whisper, and judge. Miranda will make cutting remarks disguised as compliments. Someone will ask what I do, and when I say I'm an assistant, their interest will evaporate. So why go? Because I'm tired of making myself small for people who wouldn't notice if I disappeared. Nina picked up the dress, feeling the silk slip through her fingers. And because they need to see that invisible doesn't mean powerless. Evan grinned. That's the spirit. Go make them uncomfortable. I'm not trying to make them uncomfortable. No, but you will anyway. That's what happens when people like that are forced to see people like you as actual humans. Nina spent the afternoon in quiet preparation. She washed her hair and dried it carefully, letting it fall in dark waves past her shoulders instead of pulling it back. She did her makeup with the precision of someone who'd once had professional training, subtle but polished, emphasizing her eyes and the elegant line of her collarbones. The dress fit perfectly, as if 7 years had changed nothing about her body's dimensions. When she looked in the bathroom mirror, she saw someone she'd almost forgotten. The woman who'd stood in front of donors and diplomats, who'd believed she could make a difference, who'd moved through the world like she belonged there. Holy hell, Evan breathed when she emerged. Nina, you look acceptable? Way beyond acceptable. You look like you could buy that entire company and fire everyone just for fun. Nina almost smiled. That's not the goal. What is the goal? She met her brother's eyes in the mirror. To be seen. The car service arrived at 6:30. Nina had splurged on this one thing. She wasn't going to show up in an Uber that smelled like fast food and air freshener. Evan hugged her at the door. Remember, he said, you've survived worse than rich people at a party. I know. And if it gets terrible, you can always leave. I know that too. And Nina? He pulled back, his expression serious. You're the most remarkable person I know. If they can't see that, it's their loss, not yours. She held onto those words as the car pulled away from their building, as the city transformed from their working-class neighborhood to the gleaming towers of the financial district, as the Grand Meridian Hotel rose into view like a cathedral of wealth and privilege. The gala had already started. Nina could see people moving through the lit windows, hear the faint sounds of orchestra music drifting from the ballroom. She took one deep breath, checked her reflection in her compact mirror one final time, and stepped out of the car. The red carpet leading to the entrance was photographed and crowded. Nina recognized faces from financial news, local politics, social media. These were the people who shaped the city, who made decisions that affected millions of lives, who lived in a world completely separate from the one Nina inhabited. And she was about to walk into their sanctuary, The doorman opened the entrance with a polite nod. Nina stepped inside, and the Grand Meridian swallowed her whole. The lobby was all marble and gold, crystal chandeliers throwing rainbow light across faces powdered and polished to perfection. Music spilled from the main ballroom, something classical, elegant, designed to make everyone feel sophisticated. Nina checked her coat and smoothed her dress, feeling the silk settle against her skin like armor. Then she walked toward the ballroom entrance, and everything changed. The conversations didn't stop all at once. It was more gradual than that, like ripples spreading across water. One person noticed her, then another, then a cluster. Within seconds, the entrance area had gone quiet enough that the music became painfully obvious. Nina kept walking, her heels clicking against marble with a steady rhythm that sounded louder than it should. She saw Tyler Morrison freeze mid-laugh, his phone actually slipping from his hand. Saw Sarah Chen's jaw drop. Saw a cluster of junior associates go completely still. And there, at the center of the ballroom, standing beside an ice sculpture and holding court with the firm's senior partners, were Graham, Miranda, and Cole. Miranda saw her first. Her champagne glass stopped halfway to her mouth, her expression cycling through disbelief, shock, and something that looked almost like fear before settling on cold fury. Cole's smirk died like someone had cut its power supply. Graham just stared. Nina walked toward them with the same quiet grace she'd used to navigate conference halls in Singapore and Manila, the same self-possession she'd carried before grief had taught her to hide. She didn't hurry. She didn't hesitate. She simply walked forward like she had every right to be there. Because she did. Miranda recovered first, her social training snapping back into place like a weapon being cocked. "Nina," she said, her voice crystal bright and razor sharp. "What a surprise! I almost didn't recognize you." "Good evening, Ms. Vale," Nina said quietly. "Thank you for facilitating the invitation." "That dress," Miranda continued, her eyes scanning Nina like a predator assessing prey. "It's quite bold. Where did you find it?" The question was designed to expose Nina's presumed ignorance, expecting her to name a department store or worse, admit she'd borrowed it. "Singapore," Nina said simply. "A few years ago." Miranda's smile tightened. "How exotic. Was that a vacation?" "Work, actually." Before Miranda could press further, a voice called out from across the room. "Nina? Nina Rowe?" A woman in her 50s approached, elegant in emerald green, her face bright with recognition. Nina felt her breath catch. Margaret Chen, director of the International Literacy Foundation, the organization Nina had worked with before everything fell apart. "Margaret," Nina said, genuine warmth breaking through her careful composure. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I'm on the advisory board for the Education Initiative." Margaret pulled Nina into a brief hug, completely ignoring Miranda's stunned expression. "It's been too long. Are you still doing overseas work?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Nina felt every eye in their immediate vicinity lock onto her. "No, I'm currently with Wexler and Moss Capital." "Really?" Margaret's surprise was genuine. "In what capacity?" Here it was, the moment where her current reality collided with her past. "Executive assistant to the CEO," Nina said clearly. The pause was microscopic but devastating. Nina saw understanding cross Margaret's face, understanding of how far Nina had fallen, how much she'd lost. But Margaret was too gracious to show pity. "Well, they're lucky to have you. Your organizational skills are legendary." She squeezed Nina's hand. "We should catch up properly. I'll find you later." As Margaret walked away, Nina turned back to find Miranda, Graham, and Cole, all staring at her like she'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. "You know Margaret Chen?" Miranda asked, her voice careful. "We worked together several years ago." "On what?" Nina met Miranda's gaze directly. "Building libraries in underserved communities across Southeast Asia." The silence that followed was profound. Cole broke it with a forced laugh. "Libraries? You built libraries?" "Coordinated their construction and staffing, developed community engagement programs, and managed relationships with local governments and international donors," Nina clarified. "Among other things." Graham finally found his voice. "Nina, I had no idea you had that background." "You never asked, Mr. Wexler." The words were soft, but they hit like a slap. Before anyone could respond, a disturbance near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A small delegation had arrived, 3 people in formal attire, moving with the careful precision of diplomatic training. Nina recognized Ambassador Kuwata immediately. She'd last seen him in Tokyo, at a conference on educational equity. He'd praised her presentation on sustainable literacy programs and insisted on introducing her to Japan's education minister. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Kuwata's face lit up with recognition. He immediately altered course, heading directly toward Nina while his assistant scrambled to keep up. "Ms. Rowe," he said warmly, offering a respectful bow that Nina returned with equal grace. "What an unexpected pleasure. I heard you'd returned to the States, but I didn't know you'd be here." "Ambassador Kuwata." Nina's voice was steady, but Graham heard something underneath it, something that sounded like the woman she used to be. "It's an honor to see you again." "The honor is mine. Your work in the Philippines was extraordinary. The community partnership model you developed is still being studied." He turned to Graham, Miranda, and Cole, his smile polite but his attention still primarily on Nina. "I trust you're working with Ms. Rowe in some capacity? She's quite brilliant." Graham felt the ground shift beneath him. "She's my executive assistant." Kuwata's expression flickered. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been disappointment. "I see." He looked back at Nina. "Well, whatever capacity you're in, they're fortunate to have someone of your caliber and experience." "You're very kind, Ambassador." "Not kind. Accurate." Kuwata pulled a business card from his jacket. "I'm working with several foundations on a new educational initiative. If you're at all interested in consulting work, I would very much value your input." Nina accepted the card with both hands, a gesture of respect that made Kuwata smile. "I'll certainly consider it." "Thank you." After Kuwata moved on to greet the event's official hosts, Nina tucked the card carefully into her small clutch. When she looked up, she found Graham, Miranda, and Cole all staring at her like she'd performed magic. "You speak Japanese," Graham said. It wasn't a question. "Conversationally?" Nina confirmed. "Also Tagalog and some Mandarin." Miranda's champagne glass trembled slightly. Why would an executive assistant need to speak 3 languages? Nina's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "I wasn't always an executive assistant, Ms. Vale." The music shifted, signaling that dinner would be served soon. People began moving toward their assigned tables. "Well," Miranda said, recovering her composure with visible effort. "This has been illuminating. Nina, you're at table 12 near the back. I'm sure you'll find the company suitable." "Actually," a new voice interjected. Margaret Chen had returned, accompanied by 2 board members Nina didn't recognize. "We were hoping Nina might join us at table 3. We have so much to catch up on." Table 3. Nina knew without looking that it was one of the prime tables close to the stage, reserved for major donors and VIPs. Miranda's smile was now completely frozen. "I'm sure Nina would prefer—" "I'd be delighted," Nina said, cutting her off gently. "Thank you, Margaret." As Nina walked away with Margaret and the board members, Graham watched her go, his mind reeling. 3 languages. Libraries across Southeast Asia. An ambassador who treated her like a respected colleague. Margaret Chen, one of the most influential philanthropists in the city, pulling her toward the VIP tables like they were old friends. "What?" Cole said slowly. "The hell just happened?" Miranda's expression was pure poison. "She's been playing us." "She hasn't been playing anyone," Graham said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "We just never bothered to see her." And for the first time in 3 years, Graham Wexler realized he had no idea who Nina Rowe actually was. But the entire ballroom was about to find out. Dinner was served at 7:30, and Nina found herself seated between Margaret Chen and a silver-haired venture capitalist named Richard Thornton, who'd made his fortune in sustainable energy. Across from her sat Dr. Amara Okoye, a renowned economist who'd advised 3 presidents, and her husband, a retired federal judge. This was not table 12. From her seat, Nina had a clear view of the entire ballroom. She could see Miranda at table 1, the prime position beside the stage, her expression carefully controlled but her eyes tracking Nina like a predator watching prey that had slipped the trap. Cole sat 2 tables over, his earlier amusement replaced by visible confusion. And Graham was at the head table with the event's primary sponsors, but his attention kept drifting toward table 3, toward Nina. "So tell me," Richard Thornton said, unfolding his napkin with the casual authority of someone used to commanding rooms, "what brings someone with your background to corporate finance? That's quite a pivot from international development." The question was direct but not unkind. Nina appreciated that. "Family circumstances changed," she said simply. "I needed stable income and flexible hours. Wexler and Moss offered both." Margaret touched her arm gently. "How is Evan? He must be in college by now." "Sophomore year, pre-law at State." Nina felt a genuine smile cross her face. "He's thriving." "You raised him yourself after your parents passed?" Dr. Okoye asked. "Yes, he was 12. I was 21. The table went quiet for a moment, the kind of respectful silence that acknowledged sacrifice without pitying it. "That's remarkable," Judge Okoye said quietly. "Putting your career on hold to raise your brother. Many wouldn't have made that choice." "It wasn't really a choice," Nina said. "He's my family. You don't abandon family." "No," Margaret agreed, her eyes warm. "You don't. But you do sacrifice, and that matters." She glanced toward Miranda's table, her expression thoughtful. "I have to say, Nina, I'm surprised to see you in an administrative role. The woman I knew was running programs that impacted thousands of lives. What happened to that person?" Nina took a sip of water, buying herself a moment. The honest answer was complicated. The polite answer was a lie. She settled somewhere in between. "That person is still here. She just looks different now. And she's learning that impact doesn't always look like conferences and donor meetings. Sometimes it's making sure the right information reaches the right people at the right time. Sometimes it's being the person who remembers details everyone else forgets." "That's very diplomatic," Richard said with a slight smile. "But you're clearly overqualified for assistant work." "Qualification is relative to circumstance, Mr. Thornton. 3 years ago, I needed a job that would keep my brother fed and housed while he finished high school. Wexler and Moss gave me that. I'm grateful for it." "But you're not fulfilled by it," Dr. Okoye observed. Nina met her gaze directly. "I'm fulfilled by keeping my brother safe and on track for a future he wants. Everything else is secondary." The conversation shifted then, moving to safer topics: the education initiative the gala was funding, recent policy changes affecting charitable foundations, the usual networking currency of events like this. Nina participated when addressed, but mostly listened, absorbing the dynamics at play. She'd forgotten how different this world was from the one she inhabited at Wexler and Moss. Here, people asked thoughtful questions and actually waited for answers. They built on each other's ideas instead of talking over them. They treated conversation as collaboration rather than competition. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated like her thoughts mattered. Across the ballroom, Miranda was not having the same experience. Tyler Morrison had made the mistake of showing her the betting pool spreadsheet, thinking she'd find it funny. Instead, she'd gone rigid with fury. "Everyone bet she'd wear something beige," Tyler explained nervously. "Or just her work clothes. Nobody expected—" He gestured vaguely toward Nina's table. "That." "Clearly," Miranda said icily. She'd spent the last 30 minutes fielding questions from confused colleagues. Half the associates didn't understand how the awkward assistant they mocked daily was now holding court with Margaret Chen and Ambassador Kawada. The other half were already recalculating their social positions, wondering if they'd made an enemy they couldn't afford. Cole appeared at her elbow, his expression tight. "We need to talk." Miranda excused herself from the table and followed him to a quiet corner near the bar. "This is a disaster," Cole hissed. "Do you know who Nina is sitting with? Richard Thornton just pledged $50 million to the foundation last year. Dr. Okoye advised the president on economic policy. And Margaret Chen has enough social capital to bury us if she wants to." "I'm aware of who they are, Cole." "Then you understand that we've been mocking someone those people clearly respect. Someone who apparently built libraries and speaks 3 languages and knows ambassadors." Cole ran a hand through his hair. "We look like idiots." "We look like we didn't have complete information," Miranda corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, we set up a woman to be humiliated, and instead she showed up looking like royalty and networking with the most powerful people in the room." Miranda's jaw clenched. "She deliberately misled us. She's been pretending to be some meek little assistant for 3 years. Or Cole interrupted, his voice sharp. She actually is an assistant who happens to have a past we never bothered to learn about, because we never asked, because she was beneath our notice. The accuracy of that statement hit harder than Miranda wanted to admit. What do you want me to do, Cole? Apologize? Grovel? She accepted the invitation. She knew what this was. Did she? Cole's eyes narrowed. Because Graham asked her point blank if the invitation had an intention, and he lied to her face. We all did. And now she's over there being treated like visiting royalty while we're scrambling to explain why we thought humiliating her was entertainment. Miranda turned to look at Nina's table. As she watched, Nina laughed at something Richard Thornton said. A genuine laugh, her face transforming with unguarded joy. It made her look younger, softer, and somehow more formidable all at once. Miranda had built her entire social strategy on knowing exactly where everyone stood in the hierarchy. She'd climbed from middle management to the CEO's fiancé by understanding power dynamics and exploiting them ruthlessly. But she'd miscalculated with Nina. Badly. I need to fix this, Miranda said quietly. How? She didn't have an answer. At the head table, Graham was having his own reckoning. Across from him sat Jonathan Reeves, the chairman of Wexler and Moss's board of directors. Jonathan had spent the last 20 minutes discussing the firm's reputation and public image with the kind of pointed emphasis that meant he'd heard about the Nina situation and wasn't pleased. Perception matters, Graham, Jonathan said, cutting into his salmon with surgical precision. Especially now, with the Anderson merger pending. Our clients expect a certain level of professionalism and integrity. I understand that, sir. Do you? Because I'm hearing rumors that your executive assistant, a woman who apparently has significant international development experience, is being treated as office entertainment. Jonathan's gaze was sharp. That doesn't reflect well on the firm's culture. Graham felt his collar tighten. It was a misunderstanding. Was it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like institutional blindness at best and deliberate cruelty at worst. Jonathan set down his fork. Margaret Chen just spent 5 minutes telling me about Nina's work in the Philippines. Did you know she developed a community partnership model that's now being implemented across Southeast Asia? No, sir. Did you know she speaks 3 languages? I learned that tonight. Did you know anything about her beyond her ability to manage your calendar? The question hung in the air like an accusation. No, Graham admitted quietly. I didn't. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's a problem, Graham. Leaders who don't see their people are leaders who make catastrophic mistakes. You've been so focused on the C-suite that you've missed what's happening on your own team. He leaned forward slightly. And when someone like Margaret Chen notices that gap, it becomes my problem too. I'll address it. See that you do. Because if this becomes a story about how Wexler and Moss treats talented women, the Anderson merger won't be the only thing we lose. After Jonathan excused himself to greet other guests, Graham sat alone with his thoughts and a glass of scotch he didn't want. He'd spent 3 years seeing Nina as a function, not a person. She was the assistant who kept his schedule organized and his coffee hot. She was efficient, quiet, and forgettable. Except she'd never been forgettable. He'd just chosen not to remember. Graham thought about all the small moments he'd overlooked. The way Nina always had the exact file he needed before he asked for it. The way she remembered everyone's birthdays and dietary restrictions. The way she'd once stayed until midnight helping him prepare for a presentation because his original slides were a disaster. He thanked her vaguely. He might have sent flowers, but he'd never asked her why she was so good at anticipating needs. Never wondered if maybe that skill came from experience managing complex international projects. Never considered that her quiet efficiency might be strategic rather than natural subservience. He'd never seen her. And tonight, watching her command respect from people whose opinions actually mattered, Graham realized exactly how blind he'd been. The speeches began after dinner. The Foundation's director gave an update on the educational initiatives they'd funded over the past year. A student who'd benefited from one of the scholarship programs spoke about how education had changed her life. It was moving and well-delivered, designed to open wallets and warm hearts. Then Margaret Chen took the stage. Before we continue, she said, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom, I want to recognize someone special here tonight. Many of you know Nina Rowe as an assistant at Wexler and Moss. But some of us remember when she was a driving force in international literacy development. Nina's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected this. 7 years ago, Margaret continued, Nina was coordinating library construction across 6 countries, managing relationships with local governments, training community educators, and doing it all with grace and brilliance. The programs she built are still running. The impact she made is still felt by thousands of families. The spotlight found Nina at table 3. She wanted to disappear but forced herself to remain still, composed. Life circumstances brought her back to the States, Margaret said gently. But her dedication to education never wavered. I know for a fact that she's been volunteering with local literacy programs on weekends, tutoring students who fall through the cracks of the public system. She does this work quietly, without recognition, because that's who she is. Nina felt her throat tighten. She hadn't told anyone at Wexler and Moss about her volunteer work. It was separate, private, the one piece of her old life she'd managed to preserve. Nina Rowe represents everything this foundation stands for, Margaret concluded. Commitment, resilience, and the understanding that education changes lives. I'm honored to know her, and I hope you'll join me in recognizing her contributions. The applause started at table 3 and spread like wildfire. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was standing, clapping, turning to look at Nina with new eyes. Nina rose because refusing would have been worse. She acknowledged the applause with a small nod, her face carefully neutral, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she caught Miranda's eye across the room, she saw something that looked like panic. The rest of the evening blurred. People approached Nina constantly, board members wanting to hear about her work, foundation staff asking for advice, wealthy donors offering connections and opportunities. She handled each conversation with the same quiet professionalism she'd developed over years of high-stakes networking. But she was exhausted. Not physically, though her feet ached in heels she hadn't worn in years. Emotionally. Being visible after so long being invisible was like exercising muscles that had atrophied. She slipped away around 10:30, finding refuge on a balcony that overlooked the city. The night air was cool against her skin, cutting through the overwhelming warmth of the ballroom. Nina? She turned to find Graham standing in the doorway, his jacket unbuttoned, his tie slightly loosened. He looked uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. Mr. Wexler, she acknowledged. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. Actually, I owe you several, but I'll start with the most recent one. Nina waited, saying nothing. Graham moved to the balcony railing, keeping a respectful distance. The invitation to this gala wasn't offered in good faith. It was meant to be a joke. Miranda suggested it, Cole encouraged it, and I went along with it because he trailed off, searching for words. Because it seemed harmless at the time. Because I didn't think of you as someone who could be hurt by it. Because you didn't think of me at all, Nina said quietly. The words landed like stones in water. You're right, Graham admitted. For 3 years, you've been excellent at your job. You've made my professional life run smoothly, and I never once asked you about yourself, never wondered if there was more to you than what I saw at your desk. Would it have mattered if you had? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? If you'd known about my background, about the work I used to do, would you have treated me differently, or would it have just been interesting trivia about the assistant who organizes your files? Graham didn't have a good answer for that. Nina turned to look at the city lights spread below them like fallen stars. I didn't hide my past from you, Mr. Wexler. I just didn't volunteer information you never asked for. My resume was complete when I applied. My references were available. The infrastructure was there for you to see me as a whole person. But you presented yourself as what I needed to be to get hired, Nina interrupted gently. 3 years ago, I needed stable income immediately. I had a brother to support and no time to wait for the perfect opportunity. So I took the job that was offered and I did it well. You did it excellently. Thank you. But excellence in service doesn't entitle me to be seen as human, apparently. That requires the validation of people like Margaret Chen and Ambassador Kuwata. Her voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. You didn't believe I had value until someone you respect told you I did. The accusation was devastating because it was true. Graham gripped the railing, searching for words that wouldn't sound like excuses. You're right, and I'm sorry. Not just for the invitation, but for 3 years of not seeing you. for creating an environment where you felt you needed to be invisible to be safe. I never felt unsafe at Wexler and Moss, Nina said. Just irrelevant. There's a difference. That's worse. Is it? She looked at him directly. Safety is physical. Relevance is existential. You never threatened my job or my well-being. You just forgot I was a person with a history and a future beyond serving your needs. Graham had been in high-stakes negotiations with ruthless opponents. He'd faced down hostile boards and aggressive competitors, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet devastation of Nina's honesty. "What can I do?" he asked finally. "To make this right?" Nina was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Nothing tonight, Mr. Wexler. Tonight, I just want to finish this event and go home. Tomorrow, Monday, whenever you've had time to think, we can discuss what comes next." "You're not quitting?" "Should I?" "No," Graham said quickly. "That's not what I meant. I just thought after tonight, after everything, after you invited me as a joke and I turned it into a networking opportunity." Nina's expression was unreadable. "I'm not quitting because people underestimated me, Mr. Wexler. I'm used to that. The question is whether you're willing to change the culture that made underestimating me acceptable." Before Graham could respond, the balcony door opened again. Miranda stood there, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes sharp with calculation. "Am I interrupting?" "Ms. Vale," Nina said neutrally, "I wanted to speak with you, actually, if Graham doesn't mind." Graham looked between them, sensing danger he couldn't quite name. "Miranda, it's fine," Nina said. "I can spare a moment." Graham reluctantly retreated inside, leaving them alone. The balcony suddenly felt smaller, the air charged with tension. Miranda moved to the railing, her movements precise and controlled. "That was quite a performance tonight." "I wasn't performing," Nina said. "No?" The grand entrance, the diplomatic connections, the heartwarming speech from Margaret Chen. Miranda's smile was sharp. It was all very calculated. "I wore a dress and spoke to people who knew me years ago. If that seems calculated to you, perhaps you should examine your own assumptions about what I'm capable of." Miranda's composure cracked slightly. "You made me look foolish." "I existed in a space you didn't expect me to occupy," Nina corrected. "Your humiliation is a consequence of your own miscalculation, not my actions. I could make your life at the firm very difficult." "You already have," Nina said quietly. "For 3 years, you've treated me like furniture. You've mocked me in front of colleagues, dismissed my contributions, and actively worked to keep me small and invisible." She met Miranda's gaze directly. "Tonight didn't change any of that. It just made it visible to people who matter to you." Miranda's hands clenched on the railing. "What do you want? A promotion? A public apology?" "I want you to leave me alone," Nina said simply. "I want to do my job without being your entertainment. I want to exist without being a punchline." She straightened, preparing to leave. "But I suspect that's harder for you than offering bribes or threats, because it requires seeing me as human, and you've never been very good at that." She walked toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Ms. Vale. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't orchestrate Margaret's speech or Ambassador Kuwata's greeting. I simply showed up as myself, and people who knew me recognized that person. If that threatens you, the problem isn't me." Nina left Miranda alone on the balcony, her carefully constructed armor finally showing cracks. Inside, the gala was winding down. Guests were collecting coats, exchanging final pleasantries, making plans for follow-up meetings. Nina retrieved her coat from the check, declining several offers of rides home. She wanted to be alone. "Nina, wait." Sarah Chen from compliance caught up with her in the lobby, slightly breathless. "I just wanted to say, tonight was incredible. Seeing you up there, hearing about everything you've done, I'm sorry we didn't know. I'm sorry I didn't ask." Nina softened slightly. Sarah had always been kind, if misguided in her attempts at friendship. "Thank you, Sarah. That means something. Can we get coffee sometime? Actually get to know each other? Not just—" Sarah gestured vaguely. "Not just surface stuff." "I'd like that," Nina said, and meant it. The car service was waiting outside. Nina slipped into the back seat and gave her address, letting the city lights blur past as they drove away from the Grand Meridian. Her phone buzzed. "Evan." "How did it go?" Nina typed quickly. "I'll tell you when I get home." "But Evan, it was something. The apartment was dark when she arrived. Evan had fallen asleep on the couch, his laptop still open beside him, probably waiting up for her. Nina covered him with a blanket and went to her room. She carefully hung the blue dress back in its protective covering, running her fingers over the silk one last time. For one night, she'd been the person she used to be. The person who commanded rooms and built programs and spoke to ambassadors as equals. But tomorrow, she'd go back to being Nina Rowe, executive assistant. She'd answer Graham's phones and manage his calendar and be invisible again. Except maybe not quite as invisible as before. Because the people at that gala had seen her. Really seen her. And once you'd been seen, truly seen, it was hard to disappear completely. Nina's phone lit up with notifications. Connection requests on LinkedIn, emails from people she hadn't heard from in years, messages from foundation contacts offering opportunities. Margaret Chen had sent a personal note. I meant every word tonight. If you ever want to come back to this work, we'd welcome you in a heartbeat. You have a gift, Nina. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Nina read the message 3 times before responding with a simple thank you. She wasn't ready to leave Wexler and Moss. Evan still had 2 years of college, and stability mattered more than fulfillment. But knowing the door was open, that her past wasn't as dead as she'd thought, that changed something fundamental. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening in fragments. Graham's apology. Miranda's barely concealed panic. The standing ovation that had felt both validating and overwhelming. The quiet respect in Ambassador Kuwata's voice. The realization that being invisible had been a choice, not a sentence. Nina fell asleep thinking about Monday morning, about walking into Wexler and Moss as the same person, but somehow different, about whether Graham would actually change anything or just feel guilty for a few days before returning to business as usual, about whether she wanted to stay invisible anymore, even if it meant safety. Across the city, Graham sat in his penthouse with a glass of scotch he wasn't drinking. His phone showed dozens of messages, from Cole asking what happened on the balcony, from Miranda demanding they talk, from Tyler Morrison nervously asking if there would be fallout. But Graham was thinking about Nina's words. You didn't believe I had value until someone you respect told you I did. It was the most damning indictment of his leadership he'd ever heard. Because she was right. He'd built a firm culture where efficiency was valued over humanity, where hierarchy determined worth, where someone like Nina could be excellent for 3 years and still be invisible. And he'd done it without even realizing. Jonathan Reeves had warned him that leaders who don't see their people make catastrophic mistakes. Graham was beginning to understand exactly what kind of catastrophe he'd been building. He pulled up Nina's personnel file again, reading it with new eyes. Her resume listed her international work prominently. Her references included 2 foundation directors and a former ambassador. Her cover letter had mentioned her commitment to education and community development. It had all been there. He just hadn't cared enough to look. Graham opened a new email to Jonathan Reeves. They needed to talk about culture change at the firm, about accountability, about creating systems that valued people as humans, not just functions. But as his fingers hovered over the keyboard, Graham realized he had no idea how to actually implement that kind of change. He'd spent his entire career optimizing for profit and efficiency. He'd never learned how to optimize for humanity. Monday was going to be complicated. The city lights twinkled below his window, indifferent to his crisis of conscience. Somewhere out there, Nina was probably sleeping, probably unconcerned with his guilt or his plans for redemption. She'd shown up, been seen, and survived. Whether he changed or not was his problem, not hers. And somehow, that made it worse. Sunday morning arrived with rain that turned the city gray and soft. Nina woke to the sound of water against windows and Evan moving around the kitchen, the smell of coffee already filling the apartment. She found him at the stove, making scrambled eggs with the focused concentration he brought to everything he cared about. He looked up when she entered, his expression expectant. So, he said, sliding eggs onto 2 plates. Are you going to make me wait, or are you going to tell me what happened? Nina accepted the plate and sat at their small kitchen table. Margaret Chen gave a speech about my work in the Philippines. The entire ballroom gave me a standing ovation. An ambassador I knew from Tokyo offered me consulting work, and my boss apologized on a balcony while his fiancée threatened me on the same balcony 10 minutes later. Evan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That's a lot. It was a complicated evening. Did you enjoy any of it? The question made Nina pause. Had she enjoyed it? Being seen had been validating and terrifying in equal measure. The conversations at table 3 had reminded her of who she used to be, which made returning to who she'd become that much harder. And the confrontations with Graham and Miranda had left her feeling raw in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Parts of it," she said finally. "It felt good to remember I used to be someone who did things that mattered. But Evan, coming home to this apartment, to you, to our normal life, that felt better. More real. You can have both, you know. A life that matters and a life that's real. Can I? Because for the past 3 years I've had to choose, and I chose you. I chose stability. I chose keeping us safe over chasing impact." Evan set down his fork, his expression serious in the way that reminded Nina he wasn't a kid anymore. "And I'm grateful for that. You gave up everything for me, and I know it. But Nina, I'm not 12 anymore. I'm going to be fine. If you want to go back to doing the work you loved, if you want to leave Wexler and Moss and build libraries again, I'll support that. Your tuition? There's financial aid, loans. I can get a job." He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You've been invisible for 3 years because you thought that's what I needed. But what I need is for you to stop sacrificing yourself. What I need is for my sister to remember she's allowed to want things." Nina felt something crack in her chest, a pressure she'd been holding for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted quietly. "Yesterday, I thought I wanted to just survive Monday, get through the awkwardness, and go back to being invisible. But now you remember what it feels like to be seen." "Yes, and I don't know if I can go back." Evan smiled. "Then don't." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, and Nina spent the rest of Sunday trying not to think about Monday morning. She did laundry, meal prepped for the week, helped Evan with a political science paper. Normal things, anchoring things. But her phone kept buzzing with notifications. More LinkedIn connections. An email from Dr. Okoye inviting her to speak on a panel about sustainable development. A message from Richard Thornton asking if she'd be interested in consulting for his foundation's education initiatives. The world she'd left behind was reaching for her, trying to pull her back, and she didn't know if she wanted to resist. Monday morning came too quickly. Nina dressed in her usual work uniform, charcoal slacks, white blouse, dark cardigan. She pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail and kept her makeup minimal. She looked exactly like she had every other Monday for 3 years. But riding the subway to the financial district, she felt different. The other commuters couldn't see it, but Nina knew something fundamental had shifted. She'd been reminded of who she used to be, and that person didn't fit comfortably in the invisible space she'd carved out at Wexler and Moss. The firm's lobby was already bustling when she arrived at 8:15. Nina badged in and headed for the elevators, her usual routine. "Nina!" She turned to find Sarah Chen hurrying across the lobby, slightly out of breath. "I wasn't sure you'd come in today," Sarah said. "Why wouldn't I?" Sarah lowered her voice. "Because the entire firm is talking about Saturday night. The videos, the photos. Nina, you're all over social media. People are sharing Margaret Chen's speech. Someone posted a clip of you talking to Ambassador Kuwata. It's gone viral." Nina felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean, viral?" Sarah pulled out her phone, showing Nina a video with over 200,000 views. It was Margaret's speech, professionally filmed by someone at the gala. The caption read, "Assistant reveals secret past as international development leader. Watch the crowd's reaction." The comments were a mixture of support, outrage, and speculation. People praising Nina for her humility. People condemning Wexler and Moss for wasting her talents. People debating whether the whole thing was staged or authentic. "There's more," Sarah said, scrolling to another video. This one showed Nina's entrance at the gala, the way conversations had stopped, the visible shock on people's faces. The caption, "When the invisible assistant shows up and breaks the internet." Nina's hands felt cold. How many people have seen this? Combined? Probably over 1 million by now. It's trending on 3 platforms. Sarah's expression was sympathetic. The story has everything people love: underdog triumph, corporate elitism getting exposed, a dramatic transformation. You're the protagonist everyone's rooting for. "I'm not a protagonist," Nina said quietly. "I'm just trying to do my job." "Well, your job just got a lot more complicated." Sarah was right. The moment Nina stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor, she felt the shift. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People stared openly instead of pretending not to notice her. The invisible woman had become impossible to ignore. Tyler Morrison nearly dropped his coffee when he saw her. Two junior associates who'd participated in the betting pool suddenly found the floor very interesting. Even the receptionist looked at Nina with new eyes, part respect, part uncertainty about how to behave. Nina made it to her desk and set down her bag, trying to project calm she didn't feel. Her computer hadn't even finished booting up when Graham's office door opened. "Nina," he said, "do you have a moment?" His tone was careful, formal, not the casual authority she was used to, but something more tentative. She followed him into his office and closed the door behind her. Graham gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Please, sit." Nina sat, noting that Graham remained standing, his posture suggesting discomfort he couldn't quite hide. "I've spent the weekend thinking about our conversation on the balcony," he began, "and about what you said regarding the firm's culture. You were right about all of it." "Mr. Wexler, please let me finish." Graham moved to the window, looking out at the city. "I built this firm on the principle of excellence. Best talent, best results, maximum efficiency. But somewhere in that optimization, I forgot that excellence requires seeing people as complete humans, not just functions." He turned to face her. "I failed you, Nina. Not just with the gala invitation, but for 3 years of systematic blindness." Nina waited, sensing there was more. "I've scheduled a meeting with HR and the senior partners for this afternoon," Graham continued. "We're going to discuss comprehensive culture changes, mandatory training on workplace respect, revised performance review processes that account for contributions beyond job descriptions, and consequences for the kind of behavior that made mocking you acceptable entertainment." "That's ambitious," Nina said carefully. "It's necessary. But Nina, I need to be honest with you about something." Graham's expression was grave. "The videos from Saturday night are everywhere. We're getting calls from reporters, questions from clients, and pressure from the board. Some people think you should be promoted immediately to demonstrate the firm values talent. Others think you should be let go because the negative attention is hurting the firm's image." Nina felt ice settle in her stomach. "And what do you think?" "I think you deserve better than either of those options. Promoting you as a PR move would be exploitative. Firing you would be cruel and unjust." Graham sat down across from her, meeting her eyes directly. "So I'm asking you what you want, not what I think you should want, not what would be best for the firm's image. What do you actually want from your work here?" The question hung between them, more honest than anything Graham had asked her in 3 years. Nina took a breath, organizing thoughts she'd been avoiding since Saturday night. "I want to be treated like my contributions matter. I want to be acknowledged as someone with skills and experience beyond filing and scheduling, and I want to stop being invisible unless it's convenient for someone's narrative." "Fair enough. How do we make that happen?" "I don't know if you can," Nina said quietly. "The culture here isn't something you built accidentally, Mr. Wexler. It's the logical outcome of prioritizing hierarchy and efficiency over humanity. You can implement training and revise processes, but that doesn't change the fundamental assumption that someone's value is determined by their position on an org chart." Graham absorbed that like a physical blow. "What would you do if you were in my position?" Nina considered the question seriously. "I'd start by admitting publicly that the gala invitation was meant to humiliate me. I'd acknowledge the firm's failure rather than trying to spin it as a misunderstanding. And I'd make it clear that the culture change you're proposing isn't about protecting the firm's reputation. It's about recognizing you've been running an organization that treats people as disposable. That would be career suicide." "Maybe. Or maybe it would be the first honest thing you've done in years." Nina stood, preparing to leave. "But that's your choice to make, not mine. I can't fix your firm's culture for you, Mr. Wexler. I can only decide whether I want to keep working in it." "Are you resigning?" "I'm considering my options." She moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Whatever you decide to do, don't do it because you feel guilty about me. Do it because you actually believe people deserve to be treated with dignity. Otherwise, the changes won't stick, and we'll all be right back here in 6 months. Nina left before Graham could respond, closing the door with a quiet click that felt louder than it was. The rest of the morning was surreal. Nina tried to work, answering emails, organizing files, managing Graham's schedule. But she felt the weight of attention like physical pressure. People found excuses to walk past her desk. Conversations in the break room stopped when she entered. Her phone extension rang constantly, with colleagues suddenly wanting to catch up. At noon, Cole appeared at her desk, looking uncomfortable in a way Nina had never seen before. "Nina, can we talk?" She saved her document and looked up. "About what, Mr. Raddick?" "Cole is fine, and about Saturday, about—" He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I was a complete ass. The jokes, the betting pool, encouraging Miranda, all of it was cruel and stupid, and I'm sorry." The apology seemed genuine, but Nina had learned to be cautious about sudden contrition. "Thank you for saying that," she said neutrally. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know that I talked to Tyler and the others who were involved in the pool. We're donating the money to the literacy foundation Margaret Chen runs. It seemed appropriate." That surprised her. "That's generous." "It's the bare minimum." Cole shifted his weight, clearly wrestling with something. "Can I ask you a question? And you can tell me to mind my own business if you want." "Go ahead." "Why did you stay? 3 years at a place where people treated you like furniture. Why not leave? With your background, you could have found something better." Nina was quiet for a moment, deciding how honest to be. "Because better wasn't available when I needed it, and by the time it might have been, I'd gotten used to being invisible. It felt safer than risking another fall." Cole nodded slowly. "Fear of losing what little you have?" "Something like that." "For what it's worth, I hope you don't leave now. Not because the firm needs you, though we do, but because leaving would feel like we won, like we succeeded in making you small." He met her eyes directly. "You deserve to take up space here, real space, not just the invisible kind." After Cole left, Nina sat at her desk and let herself feel the full weight of the morning. The scrutiny, the apologies, the sudden awareness of her existence, it was exhausting in ways invisibility had never been. Her phone buzzed. A text from Evan. "How's work?" "Complicated," she typed back. "Everyone knows." And I'm not sure I want to stay." "Then don't. You have options now. Use them." Nina stared at the message, then at her computer screen showing Graham's meticulously organized calendar. She thought about 3 years of making herself small, of accepting invisibility as the price of stability. She thought about Saturday night and Margaret's offer and Ambassador Kuwata's business card sitting in her wallet. She thought about what she actually wanted, not what she'd settled for. Her phone rang, an external line, not internal. "Nina Rowe speaking." "Ms. Rowe, bus Bon Aero, this is Jennifer Park from Pacific Media. I'm calling about the viral videos from the Grand Meridian Gala. Would you be available for an interview about your experience at Wexler and Moss?" Nina felt her breath catch. "I'm not interested in media coverage, thank you. I understand, but the story is going national whether you participate or not. Wouldn't you prefer to control your own narrative?" "I prefer to keep my private life private. Thank you for calling." She hung up, but the phone rang again almost immediately. Another reporter, then another. By 1 o'clock, Nina had declined 5 interview requests, and HR had sent a company-wide email directing all media inquiries to the communications department. The attention felt suffocating. At 1:30, Miranda appeared. She looked polished, as always, but there was tension in her jaw and shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Nina," she said, her tone clipped. "We need to talk. Conference room B, please." Nina followed her to the small conference room at the end of the hall. Miranda closed the door and turned to face her with barely controlled fury. "You're destroying everything," Miranda said without preamble. "I'm doing my job." "Don't play innocent. You know exactly what you're doing. Those videos, the media attention, the way you've positioned yourself as some kind of victim. It's calculated and it's working." Nina remained calm. "I didn't post those videos, Ms. Vale. I didn't contact the media. I simply attended an event I was invited to and spoke to people who knew me. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why." Miranda's hands clenched. "The board is questioning Graham's judgment. Clients are asking uncomfortable questions about how we treat our staff, and it's all because you couldn't just stay in your lane." "My lane," Nina repeated quietly. "You mean invisible and compliant, the version of me that was safe for you to mock." "I mean the version that knew her place. The words hung in the air, revealing more than Miranda probably intended. Nina stood slowly, her composure absolute. My place, Ms. Vale, is wherever I choose to be. Not where you decide I should stay to make your life easier. She moved toward the door. And if my existence threatens your position here, that says far more about you than it does about me. You think you're so superior now, Miranda hissed. But you're still just an assistant with a sad backstory. That's all you'll ever be. Nina turned back, and for the first time, Miranda saw something dangerous flash in her eyes. You're wrong about that, Nina said quietly. I'm someone who rebuilt her life from nothing while raising her brother alone. I'm someone who created programs that still impact thousands of families. I'm someone who speaks 3 languages and has the respect of ambassadors and foundation directors. She paused. And yes, I'm also someone who answers phones and files documents. But that's a choice I made for my family, not a limitation imposed by my worth. She left Miranda standing in the conference room, her usual armor finally showing real cracks. The afternoon brought more complications. At 3 o'clock, Graham's meeting with the senior partners and HR began. Nina wasn't invited, but she heard the raised voices through the conference room walls. Arguments about liability, reputation, the cost of implementing real culture change versus the cost of doing nothing. Tyler Morrison stopped by her desk around 4 looking sheepish. Hey, Nina. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about the betting pool. It was stupid and mean, and I should have known better. Thank you, Tyler. For what it's worth, I think you should stay. I think we need someone here who actually has integrity. After he left, Nina pulled up her email and found the message from Margaret Chen she'd saved from Saturday night. The offer to return to international development work, to use her skills for something that mattered. She also found the message from Dr. Okoye about the panel on sustainable development and the note from Richard Thornton about consulting opportunities. 3 years ago, she'd had no choices. Now she had several. The question was whether she had the courage to choose differently. At 5:30, Graham's office door opened and the senior partners filed out, their expressions ranging from thoughtful to hostile. Jonathan Reeves caught Nina's eye and gave her a small nod that might have been respect or acknowledgement or both. Graham emerged last, his tie loosened and exhaustion evident in every line of his body. He saw Nina at her desk and paused. Can you stay a few extra minutes? He asked. Of course, Mr. Wexler. She followed him back into his office. He closed the door and leaned against his desk, suddenly looking older than his 36 years. That was brutal, he said. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was necessary. Graham poured himself a scotch from the bar cart in the corner, then seemed to remember his manners. Would you like anything? No, thank you. He took a long drink, organizing his thoughts. The partners are split. Half think we should promote you immediately and make a public statement about valuing diverse talent. The other half think you're a liability and want you gone with a generous severance package and an NDA. Nina absorbed that without visible reaction. And you? I think both options are cowardly. Promoting you for optics doesn't address the fundamental culture problems. And paying you to disappear just proves we learn nothing. Graham set down his glass. So I'm going with option 3, which is complete transparency. Tomorrow, I'm publishing a statement acknowledging that your invitation to the gala was meant as a joke, that the firm has fostered a culture where mocking staff was considered acceptable, that we failed to see your value and experience because we prioritized hierarchy over humanity. He met her eyes. And I'm committing to specific, measurable changes with external oversight to ensure accountability. Nina felt something shift in her chest. That will damage the firm. Probably. But you were right. Culture change that comes from fear of consequences rather than actual conviction doesn't last. So I'm choosing conviction, even if it costs me. Why? The question seemed to surprise him. Because it's right. Because I've spent 3 years being the kind of leader I'm ashamed of. Because you deserve better, and so does everyone else who works here. Graham smiled without humor. And because Jonathan Reeves made it very clear that if I don't get ahead of this, he'll ensure I'm removed as CEO. So it's self-preservation. It started that way. But sitting in that meeting, listening to partners argue about whether you're an asset or a liability, I realized something. We built a firm where people are only valued for what they produce, not who they are. And that's toxic. It's wrong. And I'm done being part of it. Nina studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine transformation or sophisticated damage control. But Graham's exhaustion seemed real, his conviction sincere. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Nothing. You don't owe me your labor in fixing what I broke." Graham straightened. "But I wanted you to know what I'm planning before it goes public. You deserve that courtesy." Nina nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me. For what it's worth, I hope you stay. Not because the firm needs you, but because you deserve to work somewhere that actually values you. And I want to build that place." He paused. "But I understand if you don't want to wait around to see if I succeed." She stood to leave, then hesitated at the door. "Mr. Wexler, good luck tomorrow." "Thanks. I'll need it." Nina left the office and gathered her things, acutely aware of the eyes tracking her movements. The entire floor had probably heard about the partners' meeting by now, the speculation running wild. She rode the elevator down in silence, stepped out into the evening air, and finally allowed herself to breathe. Her phone buzzed. "Evan. Dinner at home? I'm making pasta. Be there in 30, she replied. On the subway ride home, Nina watched her reflection in the darkened window. The same person who'd ridden this train that morning, wearing the same clothes, carrying the same bag. But something had changed in the space between. She'd spent 3 years believing invisibility was safety, that taking up less space meant less risk of being hurt. But Saturday night had proved something she'd forgotten. Being seen could be powerful too. Terrifying and exhausting, yes, but powerful. The question was whether that power was worth the cost of visibility. Nina didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in 3 years she was allowing herself to ask the question. And maybe that was enough for now. The apartment smelled like garlic and tomatoes when Nina walked in, the familiar comfort of Evan's cooking wrapping around her like a blanket. He looked up from the stove, took one look at her face, and pointed toward the couch. "Sit. Food in 5 minutes. Then you talk." Nina sank into the cushions and closed her eyes, letting the day's tension drain from her shoulders. She heard Evan moving in the kitchen, the sound of pasta being drained, plates being set out. Normal sounds. Anchoring sounds. He brought her a plate of spaghetti carbonara and sat beside her, waiting until she'd taken a few bites before speaking. "So, scale of 1 to 10, how bad was it?" 7, Nina said. "Maybe 8? Everyone knows about the videos, the media is calling. The partners are split on whether to promote me or fire me. And Miranda cornered me in a conference room to tell me I'm destroying everything." Evan's eyebrows rose. "Did you destroy everything?" "I existed visibly. Apparently that's destruction when you're supposed to stay invisible." "Screw invisible," Evan said fiercely. "What did Graham say?" Nina told him about the afternoon meeting, about Graham's plan to publish a transparent statement acknowledging the firm's failures. Evan listened carefully, his fork paused midair. "That's either really brave or really stupid," he said finally. "Probably both." "Do you believe him? That he actually wants to change things?" Nina considered the question while twirling pasta on her fork. "I think he believes he wants to change things. Whether he can actually follow through when it gets difficult, that remains to be seen." "But you're staying to find out." "I haven't decided yet." Evan set down his plate and turned to face her fully. "Nina, listen to me. You don't owe them anything. Not Graham. Not the firm. Not the people who spent 3 years pretending you didn't exist. If you want to leave and take one of those other opportunities, do it. Don't stay because you feel obligated to give them a chance to be better." "I know that." "Do you?" "Because you've spent 7 years putting everyone else first. Me, your job, stability, you've sacrificed everything for other people's needs. When do you get to choose what you want?" The question hit harder than Evan probably intended. Nina felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down, the voice in her head that had spent years whispering that wanting things for herself was selfish. "What if I don't know what I want anymore?" she asked quietly. "Then take time to figure it out. But Nina, you're allowed to be selfish. You're allowed to make choices based on what you need, not what everyone else needs from you." Nina looked at her brother, 19 years old and somehow wiser than she felt, and saw the truth in his words. She'd spent so long being the responsible one, the caretaker, the person who held everything together, that she'd forgotten she was allowed to fall apart occasionally. "I'll think about it," she promised. "Good. Now eat your pasta before it gets cold." They finished dinner talking about easier things. Evan's political science professor, who'd assigned an impossible reading load, the coffee shop near campus that had started carrying the good pastries, whether they should finally replace the apartment's ancient toaster. Normal life, continuing despite the chaos. But later that night, alone in her room, Nina pulled out her laptop and opened the emails from Margaret Chen, Dr. Okoye, and Richard Thornton. Real opportunities. Real ways to use her skills for something beyond managing someone else's calendar. She drafted responses to each, professional and interested but non-committal. She wasn't ready to jump yet, but she wanted them to know she was considering it. Before she could second-guess herself, she hit send on all three. Then she opened a new document and started writing her own statement. Not for publication, just for clarity. An honest accounting of the past 3 years, what she'd sacrificed, what she'd learned, what she wanted moving forward. The words came slowly at first, then faster. By midnight, she had 5 pages of raw truth she'd never spoken aloud. Seeing it written out, concrete and undeniable, made something shift inside her. She'd been invisible for so long she'd started to believe she deserved to be. But she didn't. Nobody did. Nina saved the document and went to bed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and a sense of impending storm. Nina dressed carefully. Not her usual invisible uniform, but not the gala dress either. Something in between. A charcoal suit she'd bought years ago for conferences. A silk blouse the color of deep water. Professional but not apologetic. She wore her hair down. The subway was crowded and Nina found herself surrounded by other commuters staring at their phones. On one woman's screen, she caught a glimpse of a news headline. Financial firm CEO to address workplace culture scandal. The statement was going public today. When Nina arrived at Wexler and Moss, the lobby was already swarming with reporters. Security had been doubled, and they were only allowing employees with valid badges through the barriers. Nina showed her ID and pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouted questions following her. "Ms. Rowe, how long were you subjected to workplace harassment?" "Nina, do you plan to sue the firm?" "Are you the whistleblower who leaked the videos?" She kept walking, her expression neutral, until she reached the elevator banks. Inside, she found herself alone with Jonathan Reeves. "Good morning, Nina," he said calmly, as if reporters weren't camped outside. "Mr. Reeves, I read Graham's statement. It's honest, perhaps too honest for some people's comfort." He studied her carefully. "How are you holding up?" The question seemed genuine, which surprised her. "I'm managing, sir." "I imagine this isn't what you expected when you accepted a job here 3 years ago." "No, sir, it isn't." Jonathan was quiet for a moment as the elevator climbed. "For what it's worth, I think you've handled this situation with remarkable grace. Many people would have leveraged the media attention or filed lawsuits. You've simply continued doing your job while others created chaos around you. Thank you. I also think you're too talented to be answering phones, but that's a conversation for another day." The elevator reached the 42nd floor. "I hope you'll give us a chance to do better, Nina. But I'll understand if you don't." He exited, leaving Nina alone with his words and the ascending numbers. The floor was unusually quiet when she arrived. People were clustered in small groups, talking in hushed voices, their phones out showing Graham's statement. It had been published at 7 a.m., timed to hit the morning news cycle. Nina sat at her desk and pulled it up on her own screen. The statement was 3 pages long and brutally honest. Graham acknowledged that Nina's invitation to the gala had been meant to humiliate her. He detailed the betting pool, the mockery, the systematic way the firm's culture had treated her as less than human. He took full responsibility as CEO for creating and maintaining that environment. Then he outlined specific changes. Mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff, revised performance review processes that valued contributions beyond job descriptions, an external ombudsman to handle complaints about workplace culture, and his own commitment to visible, measurable accountability. The statement ended with a direct apology to Nina and a promise that the firm would do better by all its employees, not just the ones in leadership positions. Nina read it twice, searching for corporate spin or self-serving language. But it was remarkably straightforward, the kind of honesty that would probably cost Graham dearly. Her phone rang, internal extension. She answered automatically. Nina Rowe. It's Graham. Can you come to my office? Of course. She found him standing at his window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. His usual confidence had been replaced by something quieter, more uncertain. I wanted you to see the statement before it went public, he said without turning around, but timing didn't allow it. I'm sorry about that. I've read it now. And? It's honest. Maybe more honest than was wise. Graham turned to face her, and Nina saw exhaustion etched in every line of his face. The board is meeting in an hour to discuss my future. Jonathan thinks they'll force me to step down. Cole thinks they might dissolve the partnership entirely. Miranda... He stopped, something complicated passing across his expression. Miranda ended our engagement last night. Nina felt a flicker of surprise. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made it clear that her loyalty was to her social position, not to me. When I told her about the statement, she said choosing transparency over reputation management was professional suicide. Graham smiled without humor. She was probably right. Then why did you do it? Because you asked me if I actually believe people deserve to be treated with dignity, or if I just felt guilty about you specifically. He moved to his desk, leaning against it. And I realized I couldn't answer that question without fundamentally changing how I operate, so I chose change. Before Nina could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Cole entered without waiting for permission, his face flushed with anger. Are you insane? He demanded, waving his phone at Graham. This statement is corporate suicide. The clients are panicking, the investors are calling emergency meetings, and the media is having a field day painting us as the villain in some viral fairy tale. Good morning to you too, Cole. Don't joke about this. We're hemorrhaging credibility by the minute. Cole finally noticed Nina standing there. No offense, Nina, but one assistant's hurt feelings aren't worth destroying the entire firm. Cole, Graham's voice carried a warning. No, seriously. We could have handled this quietly. Promoted Nina, made some internal changes, moved on. Instead, you published a confession that makes us look like monsters. We were monsters, Graham said quietly. At least, we enabled monstrous behavior. And quietly promoting Nina while changing nothing fundamental would have just been another form of exploitation. Cole stared at him like he'd grown a second head. When did you become an activist? We run a financial firm, not a social justice organization. We run a company that employs human beings, and those human beings deserve to be treated with basic dignity. That's not activism, Cole. That's the bare minimum of ethical leadership. Ethical leadership doesn't pay the bills when clients leave. Then maybe we need different clients. The silence that followed was profound. Nina watched the two men stare at each other, years of friendship straining under the weight of fundamental disagreement. Cole broke first. I can't be part of this. If you're determined to tank the firm for some moral crusade, you'll do it without me. Cole, don't. I'm out, Graham. I'll talk to the lawyers about dissolving the partnership. He headed for the door, then paused to look at Nina. I hope whatever satisfaction you're getting from this is worth the jobs that'll be lost when the firm collapses. He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Graham sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. That went better than expected. Did it? He didn't throw anything. Nina surprised herself by almost smiling. The day's still young. Graham laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. You're handling this remarkably well. Most people would have run screaming by now. I've had practice with difficult situations. Right. Raising a teenage brother alone while rebuilding your life from scratch. This probably feels like small stakes compared to that. Nina considered it. Different stakes. When Evan and I were struggling, the stakes were survival. Food, housing, basic safety. This, she gestured vaguely at the chaos beyond the office walls. This is about dignity and respect, and whether I'm willing to keep accepting less than I deserve. And are you? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Before Nina could answer, Graham's assistant line rang. He answered on speaker. Mr. Wexler, the board is ready for you. Thank you. I'll be right there. He stood, straightening his tie with the mechanical precision of someone preparing for battle. Wish me luck. Good luck, Mr. Wexler. Graham, he corrected. I think after everything, you can call me Graham. He left, and Nina returned to her desk, acutely aware that the next few hours would determine not just Graham's future, but possibly hers as well. If the board forced him out, his replacement might not be interested in culture change. They might decide Nina was the problem and remove her quietly. The morning crawled by. Nina tried to work, but concentration was impossible. She fielded calls from confused clients, redirected media inquiries to the communications department, and watched as clusters of employees gathered in hushed conversations, speculating about what was happening in the boardroom. At 11:30, Sarah appeared at her desk with 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you need this," she said, offering one. "Thank you." Sarah perched on the edge of Nina's desk, her expression serious. "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business." "Go ahead." "Are you okay? With all of this? Because everyone's talking about the firm and the statement and Graham's future, but nobody's asking if you're actually okay." The question landed with unexpected gentleness, and Nina felt something crack in her carefully maintained composure. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me is relieved that the culture here is finally being acknowledged. Part of me is terrified that I'll be blamed when things fall apart. And part of me just wants to go back to being invisible because at least that was predictable." "You can't go back to invisible," Sarah said gently. "Not after Saturday night. The whole world saw you, Nina. You can't unsee yourself." "I know, that's the terrifying part. It's also the powerful part." Sarah squeezed her hand. "For 3 years, I've watched you be excellent at a job that didn't deserve you. I've watched you be kind to people who didn't see you. And I've wondered how you stayed so graceful when everything about this place was designed to make you feel small." She paused. "Saturday night, I finally understood. You were never small. You just let us believe you were because it was safer." Nina felt her eyes burn. "Sarah, whatever happens next, I hope you choose yourself. Not the firm, not Graham's redemption arc, not what's convenient for everyone else. Just yourself." Before Nina could respond, the elevator doors opened and the board members emerged, their expressions grim. They walked past without acknowledging anyone, a bad sign that made Nina's stomach clench. 5 minutes later, Graham's office door opened. He looked shell-shocked but somehow lighter, like someone who'd survived a car crash and was surprised to find himself intact. "Nina," he said quietly, "can you come in here?" She followed him inside and closed the door. Graham moved to his window again, staring out at nothing. "They're allowing me to stay on as CEO," he said finally, "with conditions. External oversight, quarterly reviews, and if client retention drops below a certain threshold, I'm out." "That's good news." "Is it? They made it very clear I'm on probation. One more scandal, one more media crisis, and they'll remove me without hesitation." He turned to face her. "And Nina, they want you gone." The words hit like a physical blow. "Not fired," Graham clarified quickly. "They're proposing a generous severance package and a strong letter of recommendation. They think keeping you here is too much of a distraction, too much ongoing media attention. They want to move past this quickly, and that's easier if you're not a daily reminder." Nina absorbed that, feeling strangely numb. "What did you say?" "I said no." She blinked. "What?" "I told them that removing you to make the optics easier would prove we learned nothing, that it would confirm every criticism being leveled at us." Graham's expression was fierce. "I told them if they force you out, I'll resign immediately and make sure everyone knows why." Nina stared at him, searching for the angle, the self-interest. "You'd give up your position for me?" "I'd give up my position rather than participate in one more injustice. There's a difference." He moved closer, his voice earnest. "Nina, I can't undo 3 years of failure. I can't give you back the time we wasted or the dignity we denied you. But I can refuse to be part of forcing you out to save face. That much at least I can do." The board meeting's aftermath rippled through the firm like an earthquake. By noon, word had spread that Cole was leaving, that Graham had threatened to resign if Nina was terminated, that the entire power structure was fundamentally shifting. The reactions were predictably mixed. Some associates were relieved, seeing it as a necessary reckoning. Others were angry, viewing the chaos as unnecessary drama that threatened their jobs and bonuses. And throughout it all, Nina remained at her desk, answering phones and managing schedules, trying to pretend her entire professional world wasn't imploding around her. At 1 o'clock, an unexpected visitor arrived. Miranda stepped off the elevator looking like she'd dressed for war. a sharp red suit that screamed power, her hair and makeup flawless, her expression absolutely glacial. She walked directly to Nina's desk, ignoring the stares from everyone watching. "We need to talk," Miranda said. "Conference room B, now." Nina considered refusing. She had no obligation to accommodate Miranda's demands, but curiosity won out. The conference room door closed behind them with a decisive click. Miranda stood with her arms crossed, radiating controlled fury. "This is your fault," she said without preamble. "All of it. The media circus, Graham's career suicide, Cole leaving, my engagement ending, all of it comes back to you." "I didn't ask to be invited to that gala," Nina said calmly. "No, but you certainly made the most of it, didn't you? The grand entrance, the diplomatic connections, positioning yourself as some kind of tragic heroine." Miranda's voice dripped venom. "You played everyone perfectly." "I existed authentically. If that threatened your position, that's not my fault." "Existed authentically," Miranda repeated mockingly. "Is that what you call strategic manipulation now?" Nina felt something shift inside her, patience finally wearing thin. "You want to know what's actually strategic, Ms. Vale? Spending 3 years making yourself indispensable to a man not through genuine partnership, but through social connections and manipulation. Building your entire identity around being the CEO's fiancé instead of having your own accomplishments. And lashing out when someone's mere presence exposes how hollow that foundation is." Miranda's face went white. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Point out that you're more threatened by my competence than you ever were by my supposed irrelevance?" Nina stepped closer, her voice still quiet but carrying an edge. "I didn't destroy your relationship with Graham, Ms. Vale. You did that yourself when you chose optics over integrity, when you couldn't stand beside someone trying to do the right thing because it might damage your social standing. You don't know anything about my relationship with Graham. I know it ended the moment he chose honesty over reputation management. I know you walked away rather than stand with him through difficulty. And I know that tells me everything I need to know about what you actually valued." Miranda's composure cracked completely. "You think you've won something here? You think Graham's going to fall in love with you now that I'm gone? Is that what this is about?" The question was so absurd it took Nina a moment to respond. "I don't want Graham, Ms. Vale. I want respect. I want to be treated like a human being rather than furniture. I want to do work that matters without being mocked for having aspirations." Nina moved toward the door. "The fact that you can't imagine those things being motivation enough says everything about why your engagement failed." She left Miranda standing alone, and this time she didn't look back. The rest of Tuesday passed in a blur of tense meetings, whispered conversations, and the constant buzz of phones as the media storm intensified. By 5 o'clock, Nina was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Graham caught her as she was gathering her things to leave. "Nina, wait, I have something for you." She followed him into his office one more time. He handed her a folder, his expression serious. "This is a formal job offer," he said, "for Director of Strategic Initiatives. It's a new position I'm creating, someone who can identify blind spots in our culture, represent staff interests at the leadership level, and help implement the changes we've committed to making." Nina opened the folder, her eyes widening at the salary listed. It was triple what she made as an assistant. "It's not charity," Graham said quickly. "It's a real job with real responsibilities. You'd have authority to push back on leadership decisions, access to the board, and the resources to actually create change." He paused. "But I'll understand if you don't want it. If you'd rather take one of those other opportunities with foundations that didn't spend 3 years failing you." Nina stared at the offer, her mind spinning. This was real power, real resources. The ability to actually change the culture that had hurt her and countless others. But it also meant staying at the firm that had treated her as invisible for 3 years. It meant betting on Graham's transformation being genuine and lasting. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Take all the time you need." Nina tucked the folder into her bag and headed home, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear and possibility, and the persistent question of what she actually wanted when she allowed herself to want anything at all. Evan was waiting when she got home, and one look at her face told him everything. "Complicated doesn't begin to cover it," he said. "Not even close," Nina agreed. And as they sat together in their small apartment, Nina realized that for the first time in 7 years, she was standing at a crossroads where every direction was actually possible. The question was which path she had the courage to take. Nina spent Wednesday morning at a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment. The job offer from Graham spread across the small table alongside printed emails from Margaret Chen, Dr. Okoye, and Richard Thornton. 3 different futures, each pulling her in a different direction. Evan had left early for an exam, but not before making her promise to choose based on what she wanted, not what she thought she owed anyone. The promise sat heavy in her chest as she stared at the documents, trying to untangle desire from duty. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "You need to see this." Turning on the news, Nina pulled up a news stream on her laptop. The anchor was mid-sentence, footage from Wexler and Moss playing behind her. Significant development in the viral workplace culture story. Sources say a major client has pulled their account from Wexler and Moss Capital following CEO Graham Wexler's public admission of workplace misconduct. The Nakamoto Group, a Japanese investment consortium representing over $3 billion in assets, reportedly withdrew after executives witnessed what they described as unacceptable treatment of staff during a recent business dinner. The screen cut to footage of Ambassador Kuwata's assistant reading a prepared statement. The Nakamoto Group values dignity and respect in all business relationships. We cannot in good conscience continue our partnership with an organization whose leadership has demonstrated such fundamental failures in these areas. Nina's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was Graham's firm bleeding clients because of the culture he'd finally acknowledged. Her phone rang. Graham's personal cell. "Nina, are you watching the news?" "Yes." "I need to tell you something before you hear it elsewhere." His voice was tight with controlled panic. The Nakamoto withdrawal wasn't random. They were at a dinner Monday night, before my statement went public. Miranda was there, representing the firm on a deal we've been negotiating for months. What happened? According to the junior associate who was present, Miranda made disparaging comments about you. Called you the assistant with delusions of grandeur and suggested the whole gala situation was you seeking attention. Graham's voice hardened. One of the Nakamoto executives recognized your name from Saturday night. He'd apparently seen Margaret Chen's speech online. He asked Miranda to clarify her comments. Nina felt cold. And Miranda doubled down. Said you were an administrative employee who'd gotten too big for your position, that the media attention was overblown, that the firm was handling an internal personnel matter. Graham let out a bitter laugh. The Nakamoto executive excused himself, made a phone call, and by Tuesday morning, they'd withdrawn their entire portfolio. $3 billion gone. Because of what Miranda said about me? Because they witnessed our leadership treating a staff member with contempt and dismissing concerns about workplace dignity as a personnel matter. Graham was quiet for a moment. Nina, they didn't just withdraw their funds, they sent a letter to the board explaining exactly why. It's devastating, and it's my fault for creating an environment where Miranda thought that behavior was acceptable. Nina tried to process this. A $3 billion client had walked away, not because of Graham's honest statement, but because they'd witnessed the culture that statement described. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Right now? I'm in an emergency board meeting. They're discussing whether to terminate me immediately." His laugh was hollow. "Turns out honesty and accountability are expensive. The board is discovering they might not be able to afford my principles. Graham, I need to go. But Nina, whatever you decide about that job offer, I'll understand. You don't owe me loyalty, not after everything." He hung up, leaving Nina staring at her phone and the news coverage still playing on her laptop. The story was escalating beyond anyone's control now. What had started as a viral video about an assistant's hidden past had become a full-blown corporate crisis. And she was somehow at the center of it all. Nina's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Margaret Chen calling. "Nina, I've been trying to reach you. Are you seeing the news about Nakamoto?" "Yes, just now. I want you to know something." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "What's happening at Wexler and Moss isn't your fault. You didn't create that culture. You simply had the courage to exist authentically in a space that couldn't handle it. People are losing their jobs because of me. People are losing their jobs because leadership failed them for years, and it's finally catching up. There's a difference." Margaret paused. Nina, I know you're considering your options, and I want to make one thing very clear. If you choose to leave Wexler and Moss, the International Literacy Foundation would welcome you back in a significant role. We're expanding into South America next year. We need someone who understands community partnership models, speaks multiple languages, and has the diplomatic skills to navigate complex relationships. Nina felt her throat tighten. That sounds like the work I used to do. Because it is. And you were brilliant at it. Margaret's voice softened. But I also know you have a brother in college and responsibilities that matter. So I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm just reminding you that this door is open whenever you're ready to walk through it. After they hung up, Nina sat for a long time, watching the city move past the coffee shop window. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that 3 blocks away, someone was trying to decide between safety and significance. Her phone buzzed with a text from Evan. Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you. Nina smiled despite everything, then gathered her documents and headed toward Wexler and Moss. She might not have answers yet, but she needed to see the situation firsthand. The lobby was chaos. More reporters had gathered, security was barely managing the crowd, and employees were streaming out looking shell-shocked. Nina badged in and rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, bracing herself for whatever she'd find. The floor was nearly empty. Most staff had apparently been sent home, but Sarah was at her desk, along with a handful of other employees who looked like they were waiting for news. Nina, thank God, Sarah rushed over. The board meeting is still going. Graham's been in there for 3 hours. People are saying they're going to force him out and dissolve the partnership entirely. Where's Cole? Already met with lawyers this morning. He's officially withdrawing from the partnership. Sarah lowered her voice. And there's something else. Miranda gave an interview to Financial Weekly. It's going to publish tomorrow. Apparently she's positioning herself as the victim in all this, claiming Graham chose optics over sound business decisions and that she tried to protect the firm's interests. Nina felt anger flash hot and sharp. She's the one who made those comments to the Nakamoto executives. We know, but she's spinning it as honest assessment of an internal situation versus Graham's public self-flagellation. Sarah's expression was troubled. Nina, if Graham loses this board fight, Miranda's narrative is going to dominate, and that narrative makes you the problem. Before Nina could respond, the conference room doors opened. Board members filed out, their expressions grim. Jonathan Reeves caught Nina's eye and gave a small shake of his head. Graham emerged last, his tie loosened, his face pale but composed. He saw Nina and something flickered in his expression. Relief, maybe, or resignation. My office, he said quietly. Please. Nina followed him in, her heart hammering. Graham closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed. They've given me 72 hours, he said finally. 72 hours to demonstrate client retention, or I'm out. They've already appointed an interim CEO to take over if I fail. Who? Richard Chen, Sarah's uncle. He's on the board. Conservative, steady, and completely opposed to what he calls my radical transparency experiment. Graham moved to his desk, sinking into the chair. If he takes over, the first thing he'll do is reverse everything. The culture initiatives, the external oversight, all of it. He'll position it as returning to business fundamentals. And me? Graham met her eyes. He's already made it clear you'd be offered a generous severance package and escorted out within 24 hours of his taking control. He sees you as the catalyst for instability. Nina absorbed that, feeling strangely calm. The fear she'd expected didn't come. Instead, she felt clarity settling over her like glass. Graham, can I ask you something? Anything. If you could do Saturday night over again, knowing everything that's happened since, would you still send that invitation? The question seemed to surprise him. Graham was quiet for a long moment, considering. No, he said finally. I wouldn't send the invitation because the intention was cruel. But Nina, everything that's happened since, the exposure of our culture problems, the forced reckoning with how we treat people, even losing Nakamoto, all of that needed to happen. We were broken, and I was too comfortable to see it. He leaned forward. So if the question is whether I regret the consequences of my choices being exposed, the answer is no. I regret that it took public humiliation for me to see what I should have seen years ago. Nina nodded slowly. Then I need to tell you something. I've been offered other positions. Real opportunities to go back to international development work. To use my skills for something that matters. I know, and you should take them. The certainty in his voice surprised her. You want me to leave? I want you to choose what's best for you, not what's convenient for me. Graham stood, moving to the window. Nina, you asked me on that balcony whether I believe people deserve dignity or if I just felt guilty about you. The truth? I started with guilt, but watching what you've endured this week, how you've maintained your integrity while everything around you exploded, that taught me something about what real leadership looks like. Graham, let me finish. He turned to face her. If I survive the next 72 hours, if I somehow keep this position and implement the changes I've promised, I'll need someone who actually believes in those values. Someone who won't compromise when it gets difficult. Someone who's already proven they can maintain dignity under pressure. His expression was earnest. That job offer I gave you was real, but it was also selfish. I need you here because I don't trust myself to do this alone. That's not a good reason to stay. No, it's not. Which is why I'm telling you to leave if that's what you want. Go build libraries. Go work with foundations that already value you. Go do something that matters instead of trying to fix something that might be unfixable. Nina studied him, this man who'd spent 3 years not seeing her and was now asking her to save him from his own failures. What would you do, she asked, if you were me? Graham smiled sadly. I'd walk away and never look back. I'd choose the work I loved over the company that failed me. I'd choose significance over stability. He paused. But I'm not you, Nina. I've never had to choose between survival and fulfillment. I've never had to sacrifice my career to raise a sibling. I've never known what it means to rebuild from nothing. No, Nina agreed. You haven't. So whatever you choose, it'll be the right choice, because you'll choose it with eyes wide open, understanding the costs. Nina left his office with the job offer folder still in her bag, and no clearer answer than she'd had that morning. But something had shifted in the conversation. Graham had released her from any obligation to fix his mistakes. The question was whether she wanted to anyway. She spent the rest of Wednesday fielding calls from reporters she refused to speak to, watching social media explode with opinions about the Nakamoto situation, and trying to ignore the fact that her choice was becoming increasingly complicated. That evening, she met Dr. Okoye for coffee at the Economist's request. They sat in a quiet corner of an upscale cafe, and Dr. Okoye got straight to the point. I've been watching the situation unfold with great interest, she said, stirring honey into her tea. And I have a question for you, Nina. What do you actually want from your work? I want to matter, Nina said without hesitation. I want to do something that improves people's lives in meaningful ways. And you don't think you can do that at Wexler and Moss? I think I could try, but I don't know if one person can change an entire culture, especially when half the leadership wants me gone. Dr. Okoye nodded thoughtfully. True culture change requires institutional commitment, not just individual effort. But here's what I've observed in 40 years of advising organizations. Sometimes the catalyst for change is someone who refuses to accept the status quo. Someone who exists as living proof that a different way is possible. That sounds exhausting. It is, which is why you shouldn't do it unless you actually want to. Unless the challenge itself calls to something in you. Dr. Okoye leaned forward. Nina, you've already proven you can survive. The question is whether you want to do more than survive. Whether you want to fight for something, even if the odds are against you. And if I fail, then you'll have tried, which is more than most people can say. And you'll have other opportunities waiting. Dr. Okoye smiled. The panel I invited you to speak on, it's a doorway to significant consulting work, 6-figure contracts, global impact, the kind of influence that shapes policy. That opportunity doesn't disappear if you spend a few months trying to fix Wexler and Moss first. Nina turned her coffee cup in circles, thinking. You're saying I can do both. Try to change things at the firm, and if it doesn't work, pivot to international development. I'm saying your skills and experience make you valuable in multiple contexts. You're not choosing between success and failure. You're choosing which challenge you want to tackle first. Dr. Okoye paused. But I'll also say this. Be honest with yourself about why you're choosing. If you stay at Wexler and Moss out of guilt or obligation or some misguided sense that you owe Graham redemption, you'll regret it. But if you stay because you genuinely want to prove that change is possible, because fighting for dignity in broken systems calls to something in your character, then stay and fight like hell. Nina went home that night with Dr. Okoye's words echoing in her head. Evan was studying at the kitchen table, textbooks and notes spread across every surface. He looked up when she entered. "You look like someone who's still deciding." "I am. Want to talk it through?" Nina sat down across from him, pushing aside a political theory textbook to make space. "If you could give me advice without worrying about how it affects you, what would you tell me to do?" Evan set down his pen, his expression serious. "I tell you that you've spent 7 years making the safe choice, the stable choice, the choice that keeps everyone else comfortable. And maybe it's time to make the scary choice, the one that risks something for the chance of something better. Even if the scary choice is staying at Wexler and Moss instead of going back to international work." That seemed to surprise him. "I thought the scary choice was leaving." "No, leaving is the safe choice now. Margaret's offered me a real position. Dr. Okoye has consulting contracts lined up. I could walk away from this mess and do work I know I'm good at, with people who already respect me." Nina traced patterns on the table surface. Staying is the risk. Betting on Graham's transformation, fighting to change a culture that's been toxic for years, potentially failing publicly while the whole world watches. Evan was quiet for a long moment. "Then I guess the question is whether you want to play it safe or whether you want to prove something." "Prove what?" "That one person can make a difference. That dignity is worth fighting for even when the odds suck. That the assistant everyone underestimated was the strongest person in the room all along." He smiled. "But Nina, you don't have to prove anything. You've already survived things that would have broken most people. If you want to take the safe choice, that's okay too." Nina looked at her brother, this person she'd raised and sacrificed for and loved fiercely, and saw that he'd grown into someone who understood nuance and complexity. "When did you get so wise?" she asked. "I learned from the best." That night, Nina made her decision. Not the safe one, not the one that would make everyone else comfortable. The one that scared her most, because it required believing she was worth the fight. Thursday morning, she walked into Wexler and Moss wearing the blue silk dress from the gala. Not because she needed armor, but because she wanted to remember who she'd been when she'd built libraries and spoken to ambassadors. She wanted that version of herself present for what came next. The few employees on the floor stared openly. Sarah's jaw actually dropped. Nina walked directly to Graham's office and knocked. "Come in." He looked up from his laptop, and whatever he'd been about to say died when he saw her. His expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "I'm accepting the position," Nina said without preamble. "Director of Strategic Initiatives, on 3 conditions." Graham stood slowly. "Name them." "First, I want full authority to implement changes without running every decision past you. If you're serious about this, you need to trust me to do it right." "Done." "Second, I want quarterly reports to the board on culture metrics. Not just what we're doing, but measurable outcomes. Staff retention, complaint resolution, promotion rates across demographics. Real accountability." "Agreed." "Third, I want it in writing that if you're replaced as CEO, my position and authority remain intact. I won't do this work only to have it dismantled the moment leadership changes." Graham's expression flickered with something complicated. "That's asking the board to give you protection I don't even have." "Yes, it is. Because I'm not doing this for you, Graham. I'm doing this for every person in this firm who's been treated as less than human. And that work doesn't end just because you're gone." He was quiet for a long moment, and Nina watched him wrestle with the implications. She was asking for institutional power independent of his leadership. She was asking to be his equal, not his subordinate. "I'll take it to the board today," he said finally. "And Nina, thank you for taking the risk." "Don't thank me yet. You might regret giving me this much authority." She almost smiled at his expression. The board meeting that afternoon lasted 4 hours. Nina waited at her desk, soon to be her former desk, and tried not to think about the fact that her entire future was being decided by people in a conference room. Sarah brought her coffee and moral support. "You know this is insane, right? Taking a job at a company that's actively imploding?" "Completely insane," Nina agreed. "Good. I was worried you'd lost your mind completely." Sarah grinned. For the record, I hope they approve everything. This place needs someone who will actually fight for us. At 6 o'clock, Jonathan Reeves emerged from the conference room. He looked exhausted, but something in his expression suggested things had shifted. He walked directly to Nina's desk. The board has approved your conditions with one modification. Nina's stomach clenched. What modification? We want to create an oversight committee that you'll report to directly. Half board members, half elected staff representatives. They'll review your quarterly reports and have authority to override executive decisions that conflict with culture initiatives. Jonathan's eyes were sharp. Essentially, we're giving you a power base independent of the CEO's office. Are you comfortable with that level of responsibility? Nina felt her breath catch. They were giving her real power, the kind that could actually change things. Yes, sir, I am. Good, because Graham has 48 hours left to demonstrate client retention, and frankly, the odds aren't in his favor. If Richard Chen takes over, you'll be the only thing standing between this firm and a complete reversal of everything we've started. Jonathan extended his hand. Welcome to leadership, Ms. Rowe. Try not to let the pressure kill you. Nina shook his hand, feeling the weight of what she'd just accepted. She'd gone from invisible assistant to institutional power in less than a week. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Graham appeared in his office doorway, his expression unreadable. Nina, can we talk? In his office, he poured them both a drink, scotch for him, water for her, and sat across from her like they were equals. You just acquired more structural power than I have, he said without preamble. You understand that, right? I do. And you're comfortable potentially being my supervisor if I fail to retain clients? Nina met his eyes directly. Graham, I'm not doing this to supervise you. I'm doing this because I believe people deserve better than what this firm has given them. If that means checking your decisions sometimes, yes, I'm comfortable with it. He nodded slowly, something like respect in his expression. Fair enough? Then I suppose I should tell you that I'm meeting with the Nakamoto group tomorrow. Nina blinked. They agreed to meet with you? Ambassador Kawada helped arrange it. Apparently he's been in contact with their executives explaining what actually happened at that dinner with Miranda. They're willing to hear me out. Graham's expression was grave. But Nina, they've made it clear they're not interested in empty promises. They want to see actual structural changes, real accountability. Then show them the oversight committee. Show them my position and authority. Show them we're not just talking about change, we're implementing it. Will you come with me? The question surprised her. Why? Because they asked for you specifically. They want to hear from the person who'll be leading the culture initiatives. They want to know if this is real or just more corporate performance. Graham's smile was wry. Apparently your reputation carries more weight than mine at this point. Nina considered it. This was a test, not just for Graham, but for her. Could she step into this new role and perform at the level required? Only one way to find out. I'll come, she said. On one condition. What's that? I speak honestly, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it contradicts something you've said. They want reality, not performance, and I won't compromise my integrity to protect your ego. Graham's laugh was surprised and genuine. You're going to be a nightmare to work with, aren't you? Probably. Good. This firm needs more nightmares and fewer yes men. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp air that felt like possibility. Nina dressed carefully, professional but not subservient, powerful but not aggressive. The balance of someone who knew exactly who they were. The meeting with the Nakamoto group was at a private dining room in one of the city's most exclusive hotels. Nina arrived with Graham, both of them silent in the car, preparing for what amounted to a referendum on whether change was actually possible. The Nakamoto executives were already seated, 3 men and 1 woman, all impeccably dressed, their expressions carefully neutral. Ambassador Kawada was there as well, serving as unofficial mediator. Nina felt the weight of their attention as she entered. This was it, the moment where her new authority either meant something or revealed itself as empty performance. Graham handled the introductions, then launched into his prepared remarks about structural changes and accountability measures. He was articulate and sincere, laying out the oversight committee, the independent review processes, the measurable outcomes they'd committed to tracking. But Nina watched the Nakamoto executives' faces and saw polite skepticism. They'd heard corporate promises before. They needed something more. When Graham finished, the lead executive, a silver-haired man named Mr. Tanaka, turned to Nina. "Mrs. Rowe, we've been impressed by your background and your handling of a difficult situation, but we have questions about your new role. How can one person change an entire organizational culture?" Nina met his gaze steadily. "I can't. Not alone. But I can create systems that make dignity and respect the default instead of the exception. I can give employees real channels to report problems without fear of retaliation. And I can hold leadership accountable when they fail to meet the standards we've set. Even Mr. Wexler. Especially Mr. Wexler. My authority is independent of his position. If he violates the culture standards we've established, I have the power to report it directly to the Oversight Committee." Mr. Tanaka's expression shifted slightly. Interest, maybe, or surprise. "You would challenge your CEO publicly?" "If necessary, yes. Because this isn't about protecting any individual leader. It's about ensuring that everyone in this organization, from executives to administrative staff, is treated with the dignity they deserve." Another executive, Ms. Yoshida, leaned forward. "Mr. Wexler's former fiancée made certain comments about you at a business dinner. Comments that suggested you were overreaching your position, seeking attention. How do you respond to that characterization?" Nina felt Graham tense beside her, but she kept her voice calm. Ms. Vale's comments reflected a culture where questioning someone's worth based on their job title was considered acceptable. That culture is exactly what we're working to dismantle. My value and everyone else's shouldn't be determined by where we sit on an organizational chart. "And yet you've accepted a position that puts you quite high on that chart," Mr. Tanaka observed. "True. But I accepted it with the understanding that my role is to challenge the hierarchy, not reinforce it, to create space for voices that have been systematically silenced." Nina paused, choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Tanaka, the Nakamoto Group withdrew your investment because you witnessed leadership treating staff with contempt and dismissing concerns about dignity as unimportant. You recognize that how a company treats its people reveals its true values. I'm asking you to give us a chance to prove our values have changed." The silence that followed was profound. Nina felt her heart hammering, but kept her expression calm, professional. Then Mr. Tanaka smiled, small but genuine. "Ambassador Kawada told us you were remarkable." He was correct. He looked at Graham. "Mr. Wexler, we will restore 50% of our investment immediately, contingent on quarterly reviews of Ms. Rowe's progress reports. If we see measurable improvement in the culture metrics she described, we will consider restoring the remainder." Graham's relief was visible. "Thank you. We won't disappoint you." "See that you don't?" Mr. Tanaka stood, signaling the meeting's end. "And Mrs. Rowe, we'll be watching your work with great interest. Don't let corporate politics dilute your integrity." "I won't, sir." After the Nakamoto executives left, Graham slumped in his chair, looking like someone who'd survived an execution. "You just saved the firm," he said quietly. "No," Nina corrected. "I gave us a chance to prove change is possible. The actual saving comes from doing the work." Ambassador Kawada lingered, waiting until they were alone. He approached Nina with a warm smile. "That was excellently done," he said. "You've grown even more formidable since our last meeting. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for facilitating this meeting. It was my pleasure. But Nina, I hope you'll keep my card. The work you're doing here is important, but so is the work waiting for you in international development. The door remains open whenever you're ready." After Kawada left, Nina and Graham sat in silence for a long moment. The victory felt fragile, conditional on so many variables they couldn't control. "What happens now?" Nina asked. "Now we do the work. We implement the changes we promised. We prove that this wasn't just performance." Graham looked at her. "And we hope that's enough." The next 3 months were brutal. Nina threw herself into building the infrastructure for real culture change, establishing clear reporting processes, training staff on new standards, creating accountability measures that applied equally to executives and administrative employees. She worked 14-hour days, fought battles with resistant partners, and learned exactly how much institutional inertia could slow even the most determined reform efforts. But slowly, things began to shift. The oversight committee proved surprisingly effective, especially with staff representatives pushing back on tone-deaf leadership decisions. Complaint resolution processes that used to take months were handled in weeks. And the quarterly culture metrics showed measurable improvement in employee satisfaction and retention. Richard Chen watched from the board with barely concealed skepticism, waiting for the initiatives to fail. But as the numbers improved and client confidence stabilized, even he had to acknowledge that something fundamental was changing. Graham kept his position as CEO, but his authority was no longer absolute. Nina's oversight meant he couldn't make unilateral decisions without considering their cultural impact. It was uncomfortable for him, humbling in ways he'd never experienced. But he learned, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Miranda's interview in Financial Weekly positioned her as the victim of Graham's reckless transparency, but the narrative never gained real traction. Too many people had witnessed her behavior firsthand. Too many knew the truth. She took a position at a competitor firm within a month. Nina saw her once in passing at an industry event 6 months later. Miranda looked polished and successful, but something in her eyes suggested she'd learned nothing from the experience. Nina didn't bother saying hello. Cole eventually withdrew his resignation and returned to the firm in a reduced capacity, having learned that his other opportunities weren't as abundant as he'd assumed. He and Nina maintained a carefully professional relationship, cordial but distant. Sarah Chen became one of Nina's strongest allies, using her position in compliance to identify cultural problems before they escalated. They had coffee every Thursday, a ritual that had started as professional networking and evolved into genuine friendship. And Evan thrived in his junior year, his confidence growing with the knowledge that his sister was finally choosing herself instead of just choosing survival. The real test came 9 months after the gala, when the Nakamoto Group's executives returned for their final review. They spent 2 days examining Nina's quarterly reports, interviewing staff at all levels, and assessing whether the changes were superficial or substantial. Nina sat across from Mr. Tanaka in the same private dining room where they'd first negotiated, her heart steady, but her hands cold. "Ms. Rowe," he said, reviewing the final metrics report. "You've exceeded our expectations. Staff satisfaction is up 40%. Retention of women and minority employees has improved dramatically. Complaint resolution times have been cut in half." He looked up, his expression serious. "These are not the numbers of a company performing culture change for optics. These are the numbers of genuine transformation." Nina felt something tight in her chest finally release. "We're restoring our full investment," Mr. Tanaka continued, "and we're recommending Wexler and Moss to other investors in our network. But Ms. Rowe, I want you to understand something. This recommendation is based primarily on your work, on the systems you've built and the integrity you've demonstrated." He paused. "Should you ever leave this firm, we'll need to reassess our involvement." The implication was clear. Nina had become essential in ways that went far beyond her job title. That evening, Graham called her into his office for what had become their weekly check-in, but instead of reviewing metrics, he pulled out a bottle of champagne. "We're celebrating," he said, pouring 2 glasses. "Are we?" Nakamoto restored full investment. 3 other major clients have reached out about moving their portfolios here. And the industry publication that raked us over the coals 6 months ago just published a feature calling us a model for culture transformation in financial services. Graham handed her a glass. "None of that happens without you." Nina accepted the champagne but didn't drink yet. "It's not over, Graham. Culture change isn't a project with an end date. It's ongoing work that requires constant attention." "I know, which is why I'm not asking you to celebrate the finish line. I'm asking you to acknowledge how far we've come." He raised his glass. "To proving that change is possible, even when everyone thinks it isn't." Nina touched her glass to his. "To proving that dignity isn't negotiable." They drank, and Nina felt the weight of the past 9 months settle into something like satisfaction. Not completion, but progress. Real, measurable progress. "Can I ask you something?" Graham said after a moment. "Always. Are you happy doing this work, fighting these battles? Is it what you wanted?" Nina considered the question honestly. Was she happy? The work was exhausting, the resistance was constant, and she often went home frustrated by how slowly change actually happened. But she was also building something that mattered, creating systems that would protect people long after she was gone. using her skills in ways that aligned with her values. "I'm satisfied," she said finally, which is different from happy, but maybe more sustainable. "Fair enough." Graham was quiet for a moment. "I got an email from Margaret Chen last week. She asked if you'd be interested in consulting on their South America expansion, said it would be part-time, wouldn't interfere with your work here." Nina's heart jumped. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to ask you directly, because Nina, you don't need my permission to pursue opportunities that matter to you." He met her eyes. "And if you decide you want to leave entirely to go back to international development full-time, I'll support that too. You've built something here that can continue without you now. You've made yourself irreplaceable by making sure the work isn't dependent on any single person." The irony wasn't lost on Nina. She'd spent 3 years being invisible because her survival required it. Then she'd become highly visible in ways that threatened everything. And now, finally, she'd achieved the kind of visibility that came with choices. Real choices, not just survival options. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need." Nina left his office and returned to her own, a real office now, with windows and a door and space that announced she mattered. She sat at her desk and pulled up Margaret's email, reading the consulting proposal carefully. It was good work, important work, the kind of impact she dreamed about when she was 26 and building libraries. She could do both. Keep fighting for culture change at Wexler and Moss while also returning to international development part-time. She could have significance and stability, impact, and income. She could finally stop choosing between survival and fulfillment. Nina drafted a response to Margaret, professional and interested, proposing a timeline that would work with her current responsibilities. Then she opened a new document and started outlining the next phase of culture initiatives at Wexler and Moss. Because the work was never finished, there would always be another battle, another resistant partner, another system that needed dismantling and rebuilding. But for the first time in 7 years, Nina felt like she was fighting battles she chose, not ones forced upon her by circumstance. And that made all the difference. 1 year after the gala, Nina stood in the same Grand Meridian ballroom for the annual charity event. But this time, she wasn't arriving as an invisible assistant or a surprise guest. She was there as a featured speaker, presenting the keynote on culture transformation in corporate environments. The room was full of executives and foundation leaders, the same crowd that had witnessed her emergence 12 months earlier. But now they watched her with respect instead of shock, listening as she outlined the systems and strategies that had transformed Wexler and Moss from cautionary tale to industry model. Graham sat in the audience, his expression proud but not possessive. He'd learned to share credit, to acknowledge that the success wasn't his alone. Sarah was there too, along with Evan, who'd taken a rare break from law school to watch his sister command a room full of powerful people. And in the front row, Margaret Chen and Ambassador Kuwata sat side by side, both smiling with the satisfaction of people who'd always known Nina's potential. When Nina finished her speech to a standing ovation, she felt something settle inside her. Not a rival. She'd learned that there was no final destination, just continuous growth. But satisfaction. The deep kind that came from doing work that mattered, with integrity intact and dignity defended. After the formal program ended, Nina found herself on the same balcony where she'd confronted Graham and Miranda a year ago. But this time, she was alone, looking out at the city with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who they were. Quite a difference from last year. She turned to find Jonathan Reeves approaching, a glass of scotch in hand. "Yes, sir. Quite a difference. I wanted to tell you something before the night ends." Jonathan joined her at the railing, his expression thoughtful. "When Graham first proposed creating your position, half the board thought it was guilt-driven nonsense. They thought you'd be a figurehead, that nothing would actually change. And now? Now they're wondering why we didn't think of it decades ago." He smiled. "You've proven that culture change isn't just possible, it's profitable. Staff retention saves money. Diverse perspectives improve decision-making. Dignity and respect aren't moral luxuries, they're business imperatives. I'm glad the business case has become clear. As am I. But Nina, I hope you know that your value isn't measured only in metrics. What you've done here, giving people their dignity back, creating space for voices that were silenced, that matters beyond any balance sheet." Nina felt her throat tighten. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. After Jonathan left, Nina pulled out her phone and sent a text to Evan. This is what it feels like to matter. His response came immediately. You've always mattered. Now other people finally see it. Nina smiled, tucking her phone away. The ballroom was still full of people networking, making deals, building the connections that would shape the next year. She could go back inside, continue working the room, leveraging her new position for maximum impact. Or she could stay here for a moment, on this balcony where everything had changed, and simply breathe. She chose the latter. Below, the city spread out in lights and possibility. Somewhere down there, people were making the same impossible choices she'd faced, choosing between survival and significance, dignity and safety, the person they were and the person they'd become. Nina hoped some of them would choose significance, choose to be seen even when visibility felt dangerous, choose to fight for dignity even when the odds seemed impossible. Because she'd learned something in the past year that she wished she'd known at 21, when her world fell apart and survival became the only goal. The real power was never in wealth or status or position. The real power was in refusing to be erased, in existing authentically, even when the world demanded you be smaller, and believing you deserved dignity, and fighting for it until everyone else believed it too. Nina Rowe had spent 3 years invisible, 7 years rebuilding, and 1 year proving that change was possible. And she was just getting started. The night air was cool against her skin as she stood on that balcony, the sounds of celebration drifting from inside. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with new opportunities, new challenges, new possibilities. But for this moment, she simply stood still and let herself feel the full weight of how far she'd come. From invisible to essential, from silence to heard, from surviving to thriving. The assistant who was never supposed to matter had changed everything. And the story they'd tell about her wouldn't be about transformation or revenge or justice served. It would be simpler and more profound than that. It would be about a woman who refused to stay invisible, and a world that had no choice but to finally see her.